Order, please. We'll now begin with the daily routine, beginning with presenting and reading of petitions, presenting reports of committees, tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table a report moving towards equity, employment equity and diversity in the Nova Scotia Public Service Commission, 2017-2018, in both French and English.
The report is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to table a report entitled The Involuntary Psychiatric Treatment Act, IPTA, Annual Report 2017-2018.
The report is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Mr. Speaker, may I please make an introduction?
Permission granted.
Thank you. If the members could pay attention in the East Gallery, joining us today are employees from the Public Service Commission who are working tirelessly and working hard to move towards equity in the Public Service Commission. I'd ask them to please stand as I read their names. Jude Gerard, who is the co-chair of the new Employee Network. Grace Campbell, member of the new Employee Network. Lorraine Glendenning, co-chair of the Diversity Conference, member of the Immigrant Newcomer Network. Hema Chopra, Diversity Roundtable. Tabina Sheikh, co-chair of Immigrant Newcomer Network. Jennifer Parker, co-chair of Diversity Conference and member of the Government Next. Megan Murphy, co-chair of the Disability Network. Anne McRae, member of the Disability Network. April Howe, Executive Director of People and Culture. Anne-Marie Delory, Director of Respectful Workplace and Corporate Diversity. Danielle Elias, Senior Consultant, Diversity and Inclusion. And Rebecca Thomas, Senior Diversity and Inclusion Consultant. I'd ask the host to please welcome all these.
The Honourable Minister of the Public Service Commission.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Government of Nova Scotia is committed to becoming a diverse and inclusive workforce that respects and reflects the people we serve, and to creating a workplace culture where all employees feel safe, welcome, and included. Whereas to realize the commitment government is implementing a diversity inclusion strategy that guides coordinated efforts across all departments and reports annually on its progress and activities under this strategy. Whereas in 2017-2018, the Moving Towards Equity report tabled earlier highlights government's many accomplishments over the last year in equity employment, diversity and inclusion, and while at the same time recognizing that we all have a lot more to do to reduce those barriers to equity. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly please recognize and thank the Government Diversity Roundtable, employee networks, and all employees for their hard work and commitment to creating diversity, equitable, and inclusive, and an equitable, inclusive workplace for all Nova Scotians. I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. Honourable Minister of Agriculture, Fisheries and Aquaculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2018, the Lieutenant Governor's Award for Excellence in Nova Scotia Wines recognized the exceptional quality of local, sourced and produced wines and honors the dedication and craft of the province's wine industry. Now, the Wine Association Winery Association of Nova Scotia and Taste of Nova Scotia members submitted commercially available grape wines with 100% Nova Scotia content and an independent panel of experts. And whereas Blomington Estates Winery, Blanche de Blances, 2019 was recognized as one of the best wines. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Blomington Estate Winery of Canning for their outstanding contribution to the Nova Scotia wine industry. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask for a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day and move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Gaspereau River fishery has an historical, social and cultural economic impact on the Annapolis Valley. Whereas the Gaspereau River supports a vibrant fishery for many fishermen who supply quality Gaspereau for both local and international markets. Whereas generations of families have fished the Gaspereau River, including Medford Mickey Caldwell, who is dedicated to ensuring the Gaspereau fishery will be there for future generations. Therefore, be resolved that all members of this House of Assembly recognize Medford Mickey Caldwell, as well as the Gaspereau Fishermen's Association, for all their hard work, dedication, and commitment to the Gaspereau River and its future. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas October is Mi'kmaq History Month, an opportunity for Nova Scotians to increase their awareness, knowledge, and appreciation of Mi'kmaq culture, history, language, and heritage. And whereas one of the themes of the Culture Action Plan is to promote Nova Scotia's Mi'kmaq culture, and we are taking action through the plan to do more to acknowledge, protect, and embrace the significance of our province's Mi'kmaq culture, its history, language, and heritage. And whereas every October, events and activities take place across our province to celebrate and showcase Mi'kmaq culture and heritage. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly and all Nova Scotians recognize Mi'kmaq History Month in our province. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to draw the attention of members to the East Gallery, where I'd like to introduce a special guest, Daryl Johnston, Vice Chair of the Board of Trustees for the Mental Health Foundation of Nova Scotia, is here with us today, and ask the House to join me in giving him a warm welcome. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas mental health is an issue that is important to all of us and touches the lives of many Nova Scotians, and whereas we are always looking for ways to improve how mental health care is delivered and accessed in Nova Scotia, and whereas this week is Mental Illness Awareness Week, a time to raise awareness and reduce stigma around mental illness, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House recognize October 1st to 7th as Mental Illness Awareness Week and do what they can to reduce stigma around mental illness. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the 2018 Lieutenant Governor's Award for Excellence in Nova Scotia Wine recognized the exceptional quality of locally sourced and produced wines and honors the dedication and craft of the province's wine industry. Whereas the Wine Association of Nova Scotia and Taste of Nova Scotia members submitted commercially available wines with 100% Nova Scotia content to an independent panel of experts. And whereas Lightfoot and Wolffield wineries, the Académie Chardonnay 2015 and Blanche de Blanc Extra Brut 2013 were recognized as two of the best wines. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Lightfoot and Wolfville Vineyards of Wolfville for their outstanding contribution to Nova Scotia's wine industry. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? It is agreed. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary minded, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move on to introduction of bills. Notices of motion. Statements by members. The Honourable Member for Lunenburg West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Beg permission to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Draw my colleagues' attention to the East Gallery today, where we're joined by Mariah Kelly, an amazing young woman and youth leader. And she's joined today by her mother, Deanna Oikel Conrad. I'd ask my colleagues to bring them a warm greeting to the House. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize Mariah Kelly, a member of the Bridgewater Barracuda Swim Club. At the 2018 Nova Scotia Summer Swimming Provincial Championships, Mariah shared the High Point Female Award after claiming 7 gold medals, 5 individual and 2 team medals. Mariah, a junior coach with the Barracudas, also won the Female CUDA of the Year Award, which is bestowed upon a swimmer who instills the characteristics of hard work and determination, as well as a mentorship of other swimmers. Mariah finished her 12-year CUDA career with a total of 38 swim medals. Mariah is a full-time business administration student at the Nova Scotia Community College Ivany campus, and she's also enrolled as a dance student at the Maritime Conservatory in preparation for the dance teacher diploma program she will enter next fall. She's also a dance teacher with Plan A Dance Centre in Bridgewater, where she previously danced competitively. I'd like the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Mariah Kelly, a remarkable young woman who is a recognized youth leader and successful competitor and athlete. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
The Honourable Member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Mr. Speaker, today I would like to acknowledge the outstanding achievements of Mr. Christopher Lavoie, who went to St. Mary's University for his undergraduate degree and then on to Dalhousie University for his postgraduate training. This dedicated young man has worked 14-hour days for 8 years to reach his dream of having his PhD in chemistry. Not only did he publish 10 research studies in that period of time, he also created a chemical process that Dalhousie University has patented and subsequently sold. Chris Lavoie has received numerous National Science and Engineering Research Council awards for all of his hard work, and he has been selected to do his postdoctoral fellowship in Pasadena, California in January at Caltech. But I've had the privilege of watching this young man grow from this sweet little boy into this amazing young man, and I will miss my son Chris dearly when he starts this new chapter of his life. I ask all members of the legislature to join me in congratulating my son Christopher Lavoie for receiving his PhD in chemistry from Dalhousie University.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you. In the West Gallery, I'd like to draw your attention to 4 incredible women who are advocates for women's issues and for women's safety and protection in this province. We have Cheyenne Jones, community advocate and volunteer for TRAY. Thank you for standing. We have Jean Sarson and Linda McDonald from Persons Against Non-State Torture. And we have Bernadette McDonald from End the War on Women Collective. So let's give them a round of applause.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Bible Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A recent Chronicle Herald article reported that Halifax has 4.7 incidents of human trafficking per 100,000 people versus the much lower rate across Canada of 0.94. Predominantly young girls and women are lured into this exploitation by organized crime, leading to prostitution and drug addiction. And the severity of the violence that they endure can shockingly even include torture. I've recently learned that even men of high status in the province are often buyers, including male lawyers, police officers, judges, and sometimes politicians. Well, according to Cheyenne Jones, a survivor, human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal activity in today's world. The buyers keep traffickers in business. It's the buyers that fuel the market. In order to stop human trafficking, which reportedly targets girls as young as 13 in Halifax, the only solution is to focus on finding and prosecuting the buyers. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In all my excitement, I would like to make an introduction. I would like to draw everyone's attention to the West Gallery, to the boy shaking his head no there. I would like to introduce everyone to my son, Christopher Lavoie, who is shortly going to be known as Dr. Lavoie. I want to be the first person known in the legislature. So I just wanted to say to every member of the legislature, you made me very happy yesterday, and by extension my son, and we wish you all the best in your future endeavours. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hants East.
I rise full of community spirit and excitement as I share the success story of Tidefest. Tidefest is East Hants weekend-long homecoming celebration. This yearly event at the East Hants Sportsplex offers fun for the whole family, such as ball hockey, washer toss tournaments, a cultural fair, music festival, a local vendor alley, and more. Tidefest embodies our community culture and shows off the ranging talent that we have to offer. On top of the promoting local, Tidefest also supports local. The proceeds from the first 2 years of the event have brought in nearly $50,000 in revenue, all of which has been put back into community organizations like the East Hants Sports Heritage Society, the Caring and Sharing Food Bank, Hants North Baseball Association, and the Enfield Rugby Club. I would ask all members of the House to join me in recognizing and thanking founder Cody Boyce and the Come Home East Hants Association. Their vision turned reality has truly brought something special to our community. Next year's event is on July 12th to the 14th of 2019. Thank you.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I stand to recognize the achievement of Patty Heighton, who was recently appointed as the International President of North America for the International Association of Rebecca Assemblies. Patty, a resident of Linesbrook, is one of the youngest presidents for the order and has contributed 25 years of service with the Princess Rebecca Lodge in Pictou. She is also the first Nova Scotian to be appointed as an international president. With her new long-year commitment, she will visit lodges all over the world to present medals and other designations to fellow members. Our communities need lifelong volunteers like Patty to contribute for the betterment of all, and we are so very proud in Pictou West of her accomplishments and the recognition of her selfless service. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, the Dartmouth North Community Food Centre and the Dartmouth Family Centre held their annual report to the community this week, and I was happy to attend to listen to the many people talk about the impact both centres make on many in our community. One of the highlights of the night was the honouring of staff members from both centres who marked notable years of service, and I'm happy to acknowledge them here. Being honoured for 5 years of service was Nicole Fyander. 10 years or more of service were Andrea Cole, Kelly Edwards, Alana Sampson, and Tammy Shields. And 15 years or more were Natasha Horn, Deborah Dickey, Marianne Borg, Sonia Belfontaine, and Carolee McDaniel. Another highlight of the night was joining my community in singing Kool and the Gang Celebration under the tutelage of the Big Sings George Woodhouse. And I'm sorry I can't regale you with my contribution to the song, but I do want to give you a big yahoo to all the staff at both the Food Centre and the Family Centre for their expertise and dedication to the people of Dartmouth North. Thank you.
The member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize Noah Adler from Prospect. Noah Adler is a member of the Royal Nova Scotia Yacht Squadron's Opti race team. Noah was introduced to sailing at an early age by his family. He ventured on overnight trips in the Chesapeake Bay with his grandfather and was introduced to bear boating, further enhancing his skills of operating a boat and assuming the role of captain. Noah joined the RNSYS Opti race team in 2015, representing Canada at the Optimist World Championships in 2017 in Pattaya, Thailand. This summer, Noah captured the first title of the season, winning the Under-16 Provincial Championships, as well as claiming the title for the Optimist Championship. In his free time, Noah enjoys snowboarding, playing the saxophone, and is a member of the school's track and field team. Noah is honoured to be representing Canada at this year's World Championships in Cyprus. I would like the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Noah and his many achievements and wish him well in the future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Dartmouth East.
I rise today to recognize the outstanding work of the Dartmouth Lions. Their dedication to Dartmouth and its residents reminds us of how valuable and important volunteers are to our province. The Lions support our youth through development and awareness programs, bursary breakfast programs and contests. Along with offering support to our youth in Dartmouth, the Lions support our parents and seniors through eye care, exams and glasses, school supplies, and personal needs and care. Mr. Speaker, the Lions are involved in so many events in Dartmouth, you wonder how they do it. From sponsoring the 18 Dartmouth Lions Air Cadet Squadron, to volunteering at the Terry Fox Run, to assisting at blood donor clinics, to helping with breakfast programs and organizing highway and community cleanups, the Lions are there to strengthen and support Dartmouth. Mr. Speaker, I ask all members of the House to recognize the great work of the Dartmouth Lions and to acknowledge that volunteers in all service clubs are the heart and soul of the constituencies we have the honour of representing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for, give me a second, I'll get it here. Sydney Whitney Peer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation and all the partners that are involved with Radio Day in Cape Breton. Each fall, the community comes together in partnership with the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation to raise important money to support local health care. This year, Radio Day is today. So today, Cape Bretoners are raising very important money for cancer care so families can stay closer to home to receive that treatment and be closer to their loved ones. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise in my place today to recognize the Cape Breton Regional Hospital Foundation, all the partners involved, and all Cape Bretoners who are contributing to make sure that our families can stay close to home to receive the treatment that they need. Thank you.
The member from Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, important dialogues concerning truth and reconciliation are taking place across Canada, and I rise to commend the Dalhousie Agricultural Campus and Art Stevens, Manager of Indigenous Students, for support to these students from both campus and curriculum perspectives. The Indigenous Student Access Pathway is designed to deliver a one-year program to First Nations, Métis, and Inuit students who would benefit from dedicated support while transitioning to a university environment. ISAP provides tools for navigating a culturally supportive post-secondary experience. This support includes installation of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council flag, renaming of River Road to reflect the Mi'kmaq language, mural in the Student Learning Commons, smudging rooms, and more. Self-identified Indigenous enrollment is rising, but we know that we can do more, although we have come far. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Fairview-Clayton Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to recognize Ryan Lane, the outgoing community gardener at Mount St. Vincent University. Ryan has been working at the community garden for 2.5 years while completing his degree in applied human nutrition. During his time at the Mount, he excelled academically, allowing him to secure an internship at the Mount this month. Upon completing his degree, Ryan will become a registered dietitian. The garden began in 2009 from the proposal of another nutrition student at the Mount. Since then, the garden has expanded, allowing there to be a beehive included in the area. The urban garden in the heart of the campus has become a popular attraction for many of the students at the Mount. Ryan's role included recruiting volunteers to assist in the maintenance of the garden, as well as distributing the food produced in the garden at a low cost to students. Ryan is highly intelligent, personable, and often used the knowledge from his degree to help him in the success of running the garden, and he will be greatly missed by everyone at the Mount. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House join me in thanking Ryan Lane for his dedication to the community garden and wishing him the best of luck in his future endeavours. Thank you.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the City Mines resident and former police chief, Harry Vickers. After his retirement, Harry decided that the philosophy of living his best life was to enjoy a healthy, productive and meaningful life and to tend to one's mind, body and soul. As an angling enthusiast, he helped create the Cape Breton Anglers Association, and 40 years later, at the age of 80, he is president of that association. When not fishing, Harry can be found walking daily or making wine, tending to his garden or taking part in Cape Breton Regional Police Retirement Association activities. I'd like to take this opportunity to salute Harry Vickers as he continues to serve his community through his very busy life. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Order. There's a lot of chatter in the chamber right now. I ask that people keep it down, please. The honourable member from Waverley Fall River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to recognize Sarah McDonald Miles, a grade 10 student at Lockview High in Fall River. Sarah is running her own business that spreads the love to many area charities through Link of Love and Share the Warmth. She's helping charities such as Brunswick Street Mission, SPCA, Feed Nova Scotia, and Homebridge Youth, just to name a few. Mr. Speaker, Sarah is a lifelong member of the Me to We Youth Empowerment Group. Sarah is combining her passions of running her own business and helping others less fortunate. Whether it is collecting gentle and used winter clothing and accessories and distributing them to the local shelters, or selling bracelets, making a difference is one link at a time. Sarah is definitely making the difference. I ask all members of the House of Assembly to congratulate and wish Sarah the best of luck with her programs, and thanks to her for supporting those in need.
The honourable member for Queen Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the Happy Wheelers Club from Queen's Manor in Liverpool. Twice a month from May until fall, this lively group of volunteers can be seen pushing smiling residents in wheelchairs around the streets of Liverpool. They stop off at points of interest and have an ice cream along the way. The club was the brainchild of local resident Sue Higgins. On June 23rd, the group was honoured to be parade marshal in the Lions Grand Street Parade as part of Privateer Days. Mr. Speaker, I congratulate Queen's Manor and all the volunteers for this initiative, which gives less mobile residents a taste of life around our town. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Hammonds Plains, Lucasville.
Mr. Speaker, I'll recognize Keenan McIsaac of Hammonds Plains today. He's a member of the Acadie Bathurst Teton who won the 2018 Memorial Cup. Keenan grew up in Hammonds Plains, played his hockey in Bedford, in the Bedford area. He played for Team Nova Scotia for several years, and he also played his final year of high school with Ross A. Netherwoods before joining the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League in 2015 with Chicoutimi. Keenan was traded last summer to the Acadie Bathurst Teton, where he said to play the type of game coaches really rely on. He's a smooth skater, great defensively. Bathurst head coach Mario Pouliot was impressed with McIsaac and indicated he was a player that he came to rely on, especially in the final, where he played extremely well and helped Bathurst win the championship. I ask all members of the House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Keenan McIsaac of Hammonds Plains on winning the 2018 Memorial Cup. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Richmond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, may I beg leave to make an introduction?
You may.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to introduce today my cousins Sheila McGuire and Blair Richards, who are with us today in the West Gallery. And particularly today, they're here accompanying their mother, my great auntie, Bernice Richards, who today is a very special day. And yesterday, of course, passing our cancer bill is a special day for that as well. She's a 6-time cancer survivor. And today is my auntie's 94th birthday, and she is here to celebrate it with us. I want to wish her a happy birthday. Mr. Speaker, My great-aunt Bernice Richards was born in River Bourgeois, Richmond County on October 4th, 1924, and then went on to devote her life to be in service to others and a beacon to charity and to many in her community and her family. My aunt is a dynamic storyteller, an extraordinary networker, a mother of 7 children with a dynamic wit and a positive outlook on life, but above all, a champion for those less fortunate. Bernice worked for the Salvation Army from 1972 to 1990 and was instrumental in fundraising millions of dollars to assist with major renovations to the Grace Maternity Hospital, which in 1996 merged to become the I.W. Grace Hospital for Women, Children and Families, and now the I.W. Health Centre. She has been a member of the Children of Mary Sodality at St. Mary's Cathedral Basilica since 1950, where she worshipped and served since this day on her 16th birthday in 1940. With a household of 9, there was always still room for the family and friends who needed safe shelter at the Richards home in Tobin Street. I would like to thank my great-aunt Bernice Richards for continuing to be an impeccable role model, for her extensive service to families in need, and for always providing and proving that the actions of one incredible, compassionate woman can have a long-lasting impact for generations to come. Happy 94th birthday, Aunt Bernice.
Happy 94th birthday. The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to congratulate Matt Olson, of head of St. Margaret's Bay in beautiful Chester St. Margaret's. Matt is a 4th-year business student at Acadia University who this past year identified a market niche for a small business idea. Although we love our Canada geese, we don't necessarily love the 2 to 4 pounds of waste they produce daily and often leave on our properties. Matt is now marketing Away with Geese, a device which does not endanger the geese but is effective in clearing them from a 3-acre area. The solar-powered device does not harm the geese and is especially useful for open public spaces. It has proved to be particularly effective at the Chester Golf Course this past year. Mr. Speaker, I invite the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in congratulating Matt Olson on the operation of his successful small business, Olson's Property Management, and to wish him well in his future endeavours. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
Mr. Speaker, today I'd like to recognize dairy farmers of Nova Scotia. There are 210 dairy farms across our province. Dairy farmers milk their cows twice a day, every day of the year, hardworking and provide our communities with a healthy, local, sustainable supply of milk. Unfortunately, our Prime Minister, Trudeau, has negotiated away part of the market share of our dairy farmers, both here in Nova Scotia and across the country. Through the European Union Trans-Pacific Partnership and just recently with the new US-Mexico-Canada deal. I know there is great fear among the future of this industry, and today I want to assure the dairy farmers here in Nova Scotia that they have my utmost respect and dedication to their industry. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lunenburg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to recognize the town of Lunenburg's Mayor, Rachel Bailey, who competed in the 2018 55+ Games held in St. John, New Brunswick in August. The Canada 55+ Games promotes mental, spiritual and physical well-being among Canadians 55 years of age and older. Having turned 55 last year, Mayor Bailey seized the opportunity to compete in track and field, excelled at her events. Mayor Bailey finished first in the women's 55+ 400 and 1500-meter runs and second in the 50 and the 100-meter dashes. Mr. Speaker, I would ask that you and the members of this House of Assembly please join me in congratulating Mayor Rachel Bailey on her accomplishments at the 2018 Canada 55+ Games. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Pictou West.
Mr. Speaker, I want to stand and congratulate Pictou's first Light the Night Walk, which successfully raised $37,772 in support of the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society of Canada. Volunteers, supporters, and those who walked in the memory of somebody close lined the Jitney Trail with sneakers laced in Pictou. The funds raised will be awarded as research grants to increase our knowledge of blood-based cancers and will be used to provide patient education and other support services. This event coincides coincided with walks throughout the nation with over 35,000 Canadians taking part. It was an incredible evening with our community coming together in a message of positivity and remembrance. I know that this event will continue to be a successful event going into the future, and I was proud to take part. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clayton Park West.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to make an introduction. We have with us today Asil Muhammad Ali, who is immigrated to Canada 4 years ago. Asil is from Iraq, but have lived also in Syria prior to coming here, and I will read her member statement. Thank you. Please welcome her in the House. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to celebrate a bright young woman from my riding who gives back through volunteerism. Asil Muhammad Ali and her family left war-torn Iraq in 2006. They lived 8 years in Syria before immigrating to Canada in 2014. I am happy to say that they are calling Halifax as their home. Asil volunteers with the Al-Rasul Islamic Society, where she designs and teaches religious studies to children of ages 7 to 13. She co-organized the Shukran Canada event with the Dalhousie Syrian Student Society to raise funds for the Children Wish Foundation. Asil has also volunteered at several community events, including the Blue Nose Marathon, Parade of Lights, and Light the Night. Last but not least, this past August, Asil organized the Iraq Culture Booth at the first annual Mosaic Festival. Mr. Speaker, I ask that the members of this House join me in applauding Asil for her countless hours of volunteer work. She is an exceptional role model of all women in her community. Thank you.
The honourable member for Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge the recent 20th annual Allen Hall Memorial Ball Tournament, which was held at the Catalone Ball Field. Most of the players at this tournament have been playing for 25+ years. This year, Bryden Burke's team from Lewisburg was victorious, beating Marionbridge in the championship game. Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to congratulate and thank the umpires, spectators, and volunteers who work tirelessly every year to make the Allen Hall Memorial Ball Tournament such a great weekend event that family and community look forward to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for...
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Communities in Bloom is a Canadian non-profit organization committed to fostering civic pride, environmental responsibility through community involvement. Communities in Bloom Yarmouth recently competed at the Communities in Bloom National International Symposium in Alberta, where Yarmouth had its highest ever placement in the Circle of Excellence, receiving 5 blooms, a silver, and was also awarded an Outstanding Achievement Award in the Urban Forestry Tree Inventory category. I ask this House to join me in congratulating Communities in Bloom Yarmouth on this impressive accomplishment and in thanking its hard-working volunteers for dedicating their time and energy to making our community such a better place to live.
The honourable member for Cole Harbour Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to acknowledge my community's theatre group, the Passage Players Society. This not-for-profit society began with a small group of residents in 2015 and quickly grew to a membership of 55 before the first year was through. The Passage Players have held many shows, including dinner theatres. Currently, our Passage Players are preparing Lawler, The Real Treasure Island, written by William Mitchell and produced by former MLA Becky Kent. This pirate play involves community members, including myself, young and old, and promises to be wildly hilarious and successful. I ask all members of the Nova Scotia Legislature to join me in recognizing the Passage Players Society for their hard work and dedication to their community with bringing the fine arts out to Eastern Passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to acknowledge and celebrate 3 very important people in the community that is the Dartmouth North Boys and Girls Club. Dale Thomas has just marked his 30th anniversary at the club. He has served as a mentor and role model to countless children, and many consider him the father of the club. He keeps the club clean and has safely transported generations of Dartmouth North kids as the bus driver. No one knows the history of Dartmouth North Club and the neighbourhood quite like Lillian Monroe. For 31 years, Lillian has selflessly served in the preschool, after-school and early morning programs, and she coordinates many of the club's special events, including the upcoming Walk Against Violence. Also for 31 years, Sylvia Andrews has served families at the club and literally served them as a cook, as a breakfast program coordinator, and in the lunch programs. She now works in the early morning program. If there's a special project involving nutrition, Sylvia is there. The Dartmouth North Boys and Girls Club is a very special and important place for the children in our community, and it's wonderful that that generations of families have grown up with Dale, Sylvia, and Lillian. And I ask the House to join me in thanking them for their service to the families of Dartmouth North.
The honourable member for Bedford.
Mr. Speaker, earlier this year, the Bedford Volunteer Awards honoured David Selig for his extensive efforts on behalf of the Fort Sackville Foundation at Scott Manor House. Dave began his volunteer work at the Manor House in 2004 as part of a team that completed several major renovation projects. For the past few years, Dave has been in charge of the yearly maintenance of the Manor House, and as you can imagine, that's no small task in an historic home. In 2015, Dave oversaw construction of a new garage. It was on site pretty much every day during that project. Dave also works with the outside organizations that use the house, and he's the main point of contact with the City of Halifax, which actually owns the manor. He deals with HRM on everything from inspections to repairs. Dave serves on the board of directors where his advice and input is valued. He's also been involved in many other organizations, Bedford Fire Department, Brookside Cemetery Corporation, and Bedford United Church. And he also steps up to drive people to appointments and delivers Christmas goodies. Dave is a treasured member of our community, and I want to thank him for his patient, good-natured leadership.
I would like to bring to the members' attention again, there's a lot of chatter going on. I ask that we keep the chatter down while the members do their statements. The honourable member for Colchester, Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many rural young people growing up on family farms develop skills in business, organization, discipline, and time management during their childhood and youth. Two step siblings from North Alton, Brendan Meissner and Jasmine Lomond, have taken this step a little further by starting a family business that for Meister is life-changing. Meister suffered an accidental drug overdose 2.5 years ago, and there have been some lasting results. Their joint business venture, Maritime Treasure Goat Therapy, has provided Meissner with a sense of purpose and responsibility. He has gradually taken on full management of livestock, and Lohman, who has a degree in chemistry from Acadia, produces soaps, bath bombs, and sugar scrubs. I wish to congratulate this young couple for their ability to turn tragedy into a livelihood. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Truro Bible Hill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been contacted lately by a number of women telling me their stories of sexual assault, some in regions of the province where they've managed to obtain the services of a sexual assault nurse examiner, and some from Colchester County where they were unable to receive the same treatment. One woman in her 40s tells me that walking into the hospital was one of the hardest things she'd ever done. She also tells me that the person who attacked her wears a uniform, so when she saw the hospital security, she stood frozen in fear. The only way she could convey why she was there was to type, "I need a sane nurse," in her phone and show it to the triage nurses. She says that when the sane nurses arrived, she was treated with utter respect. And she said that because of this, it was able to help her to make a statement. Mr. Speaker, providing a sane to our hospital in Truro would only cost $98,000 for the year. Surely this is money well spent by the province. Again, I request this government provide a sane for Colchester County. Thank you.
The honourable member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 85-year-old Billy Cameron from Tattamagush, Colchester North, joined the Canadian military when he was 17, fought in the Korean War, and in 1955 joined the Royal Canadian Legion, and for 60-plus years has been an active member. He is well known for the countless hours he has volunteered, not only at the Legion, but at numerous community events. A life member of Branch 64, Cameron has served as president of the branch, as a member of the executive, of which he is now an honorary member. He is a member of the nominating committee, the Remembrance Day Committee, and serves as a liaison for Air Cadet Squadron 596. In June, Cameron was presented with his 60-year pin, as well as the Governor General of Canada Canada Sovereign Medal for Volunteers. The medal recognizes volunteer achievements of Canadians in a range of fields. When presenting the prestigious award, the president of Branch 64 Royal Canadian Legion said of Cameron, and I quote, "committed his life to his country, his province, and his community."
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to congratulate the 2018 Hospital Hustle Committee, organizers of an annual fundraiser for Queen's General Hospital in Liverpool, comprised of sales tables, silent auctions, bouncy castles, edible treats, and hosted at the Liverpool Curling Club. Mr. Speaker, their vision this year was to make this a true community event, giving many other community organizations the opportunity to be involved. With a goal to raise $25,000 to buy an electrical surgical generator to support the endoscopic program. In the process, they managed to raise the amazing sum of $28,500. Congratulations to co-chairs Dennis and Kelly Oxner and to everyone involved, including the community, without whom none of this would be possible. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Antigonish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2018 marked the 155th Eastern Nova Scotia exhibition in Antigonish. It's an annual tradition for many families in the region, a kind of unofficial wrap-up to the summer. The 5-day event kicks off with 4-H Day, an important youth component that sees 4-H participants who are involved in everything from showing livestock to completing projects in woodworking, sewing, etc. Over the 5 days, there's a jam-packed agenda with many demonstrations, shows, competitions, and entertainment. There's certainly something for people of all ages. It is an opportunity for our community to celebrate not only our heritage, but to support those currently in the agriculture industry. This year's exhibition had more than 12,000 people through the gates of the exhibition grounds, and the highlight for many was the Saturday night concert with Ashley McIsaac. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to congratulate the organizers of the Eastern Nova Scotia exhibition on another successful year and thank them for the dedication to our local agriculture community.
The honourable member for Cumberland North.
I'd like to recognize Helen Sims of Cumberland Transit Authority. Through her dedication to her community, Helen was able to raise funds of over $200,000 for the program to buy new vehicles for their clients. The funds were made available through Nova Scotia's Accessible Transportation Assistance Program. Helen knows the importance of accessibility to her clients and our community. I would like to thank her for being a voice and an aid to members of the county. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Clare Digby.
For the last 46 years, 4-H Nova Scotia has chosen youth to participate at the annual Citizenship Congress in Ottawa. The participants, including Riley Killen of Digby County, have a great opportunity to learn about their country, its history, and its government. The 6 days are packed with activities including tours of Ottawa, landmarks, debates, workshops, roundtables, and dropping in at the question period. Riley's debate was focused on the importance of young people to be involved in the public service, was held at the Senate chamber. One of the high points for Riley was going to the citizenship ceremony for 30 immigrants and meeting our newest Canadian citizens. It is while watching the new Canadians say the oath of allegiance and talking to them afterwards that the young people realize how badly people want to move here and call Canada their home. I congratulate Riley on being chosen for this very special Congress. He has always been an active member of our community, including being a member of the 4-H for years and a member of the Plimpton and Gilbert's Cove Fire Department. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Bedford on an introduction.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to direct the honourable members' attention in the chamber to the East Gallery, where we are joined today by Stephen Moore. Some of the members of this House would remember Stephen, which may be why they're booing, I don't know, but they will remember Stephen, who worked with us at the Liberal Caucus office and in the Premier's office, and we'd like to welcome here to the chamber today.
The honourable member for Chester St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to congratulate a very important component of each of our constituency offices. Those are our hard-working and often underappreciated constituency staff. In my case, that includes my constituency assistant, the indomitable Penny Lawless, and my constituency relations manager, the invincible Geraldine Pauley. I note that recently here in the House that the member from Lunenburg has acknowledged her staff, Ruth and Sherry, who were here in the office yesterday, and I believe the member from Cumberland South recognized his staff. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of the Nova Scotia House of Assembly to join me in thanking all of our invaluable constituency staff. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Guysborough Eastern Shore Tracadie.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in recognition of a wonderful retired couple, Barry and Sandy Potter from Halfway Cove in Guysborough County. Barry is a volunteer board member for the Guysborough County Adult Learning Association, where he exceeds expectations by participating in all promotional functions, assisting with policy development, providing countless hours of technology support, and even transportation for clients. Sandy is a very popular vendor at the Guysborough Community Market, where she sells her beautiful handmade greeting cards and delicious selection of homemade preserves. Patrons of the market look forward to her warm personality as much as her crafts. Mr. Speaker, Barry and Sandy Potter are adored by their fellow community members, and today I thank them for their volunteerism, community spirit, and wish them many more happy and healthy retirement years to come. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Armdale.
Mr. Speaker, last week I was lucky to participate in the second Take Your MLA to Work Day with the pharmacy team in my constituency at Crowell's Guardian on Herring Cove Road. It was a great visit with friendly staff and patients. I observed firsthand the pharmacy's methadone services, preparation of compliance packaging, the coagulation pilot project for patients on warfarin that they're undertaking with Doctors Nova Scotia, and so much more. Thank you to pharmacist Vina Anderson and Director of Pharmacy and Medical Operations Andrew Buffett and the entire pharmacy team. I ask all members of the House to join me in thanking them for providing excellent clinical care and providing access to health care. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sydney Whitney Pier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to recognize Matthew Shimon, a 12-year-old grade 7 student who has been selected to star on Canada's Smartest Person Junior, which airs on CBC in November. He's an exceptional student of the French Immersion Program at Whitney Pier Memorial Middle School. And Mr. Speaker, Matthew's philosophy is being kind and helping people is a good trait of being really smart. If you know things and are kind and giving giving helpful advice, that's what he calls really smart. Mr. Speaker, our community is very proud of him, and I wish Matthew all the best as he competes on Canada's Smartest Person Junior in November on CBC.
The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Mr. Speaker, a wonderful birthday party was held on September the 16th for Isabel Wyatt's 100th birthday. Isabel is very involved in the community. A longtime resident of Fall River, Isabel has been seeing many changes, notably the growth of Fall River Windsor Junction community. Mr. Speaker, the Centurion spoke of being the first people who led a march to the legislature to see that the provinces paved the gravel road in Fall River in 1960. On the day of her birthday celebration, the streets were lined with cars, and there were a line outside waiting to greet Isabel. When asked if what was her key for reaching 100, smiling and answered, a glass of whiskey every day. I will say Isabel is an active, healthy, and physically fit. Mr. Speaker, I ask members of the House of Assembly and the Legislature to congratulate Isabel on her 100th birthday. Thank you.
Order, please. Time allotted for member statements has expired. We'll now move on to oral questions put by members to ministers. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Premier. Last week, during Right to Know Week, a lecture was given by a senior investigator at the Office of the Information and Privacy Commissioner. It included a statistic that I found rather staggering. In 2017, the province of Nova Scotia received 2,285,000 information requests. That's an average of almost 9 requests every business day. The senior investigator compared that with Switzerland, where they only had 551 requests in 2017, and Switzerland, Mr. Speaker, has 8 times more the population of Nova Scotia. The senior investigator's conclusion is if people have free access to information, they don't make 2,285 requests. So will the Premier please acknowledge that Nova Scotia guards too much information unnecessarily?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question. She would also realize the numbers that she's been putting out there. I hope that senior person from the information officer recognize that 82% of the requests that come in are filled within 30 days, Mr. Speaker. That's as high as it's ever been. We're going to continue to improve that and continue to make sure that those Nova Scotians who ask for information, Mr. Speaker, what we can give them, we'll give them.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
The point is they shouldn't be asking in the first place. So the senior investigator continues to say that here in Nova Scotia, 14% of requests result in full disclosure. In Switzerland, that number is 55%. It further underscores just how reluctant this government is to share information with its citizens. And it speaks to the paradigm, the default position for information. And here, Mr. Speaker, the default is to hide until you are forced to reveal. Will the Premier commit to changing the philosophy of his government to one where the default is to disclose unless it is absolutely necessary to withhold?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member would know, the FOIPOP officers throughout the departments respond to the requests that continue to come in. She would also know, Mr. Speaker, open data that we put out there so that Nova Scotians are using that data to create opportunity for themselves and businesses. She would also know that we put up a website so when a request comes in, not only do we send that information out to the person who asked for it, we actually put it live. Mr. Speaker, we're continuing to make sure that we continue to open up this province. And I want to remind the honourable member again, Mr. Speaker, 82% of those are done within 30 days, Mr. Speaker. That's the highest number this province has seen.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
And from what we hear from Nova Scotians, that's information that is not relevant to them. So this government, I know, likes to brag about everything the Premier just said, and it's easy to achieve when you don't take the time to give the applicants the information that they ask for. Again, from the senior investigator, Nova Scotia responds to applicants with, and I quote, no record return, 33% of the time. So that means one in 3 questions get nothing in response. And as we all know, in this House, most days, that's 0 and 15. So, will the Premier admit that these statistics indicate an unacceptable level of secrecy from this government?
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, what it indicates, Mr. Speaker, is that when the honourable member and her party go on fishing trips looking for information, Mr. Speaker, that the government doesn't have any information related to, they don't give it to them. Would they prefer we made something up, Mr. Speaker? That's what former governments used to do. This government is open and transparent and will continue to be open and transparent, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me be clear about something, Mr. Speaker. I've been in this House since 2003, and every party that sat on this side of the House has been asked to put together a health committee so that we could scrutinize the largest budget item in this province. That party said, no, we're open and transparent, giving them the opportunity to scrutinize our largest budget item here. On top of that, Mr. Speaker, we're allowing the Auditor General, the independent Auditor General, to have his place here, and hopefully the opposition will take their duty seriously and show up next time.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party. Order, please. Order, please. The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Today we learned that the new hospital will be built using a design, build, finance, maintain P3 model. The evidence against the use of this model is so overwhelming. The schools the government built on this model cost the public $228 million to buy back. In
Order,
Ontario,
please. The honourable leader of the New Democratic Party has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Ontario, the Royal Ottawa Hospital cost an extra $88 million to build using a P3. The Brampton Civic cost $200 million more to build on this model. In the face of all the evidence that's available, why in the world has the Premier decided to rely on private companies to design, build, finance and maintain the QE2?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Honourable Member for the question. We compared, Mr. Speaker, what it would be if we continued to do the traditional build against what it is, Mr. Speaker, on a P3 project. The reports that the Honourable Member had referenced have been looked to through Deloitte, Mr. Speaker. They continue to bring back a recommendation to what would be the best value for the taxpayers of this province, Mr. Speaker, ensure that we could do it as quickly as possible. We've accepted that, Mr. Speaker. Portions of this related to the current footprint, the activity that would take place inside of those particular footprints. So, example, at the HI site on the 3rd and 5th floor, that will be done in the traditional build, but all of the new build on that particular footprint in Clayton Park will be done through a P3 model, Mr. Speaker. We're looking forward to ensuring that that project goes down the road so that Nova Scotians get the healthcare infrastructure they deserve, Mr. Speaker. It has gone through successive political parties who did not have the courage to stand up and answer the call and ensure that our citizens and our families had state-of-the-art facilities.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier can remonstrate about this till the cows come home twice. It does not change the fact that internationally there is great concern and criticism about the use of this model in projects, especially of hospital sort, because in these models the government loses control over the design. Under this model, the successful proponent is in control of the design, which will therefore not be in the hands of the people who know Nova Scotia health care best. Why would the Premier adopt a model for redeveloping the QE2 that will limit our control of the project's design?
The Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That's exactly why we're doing the P3 model, Mr. Speaker. It is actually our health care providers who will help us put the design together, Mr. Speaker. And when we hand that design over to the P3 proponent, Mr. Speaker, we expect them to deliver on the amount they have delivered to us. The Honourable Member hits an important point. When capital projects have been built under successive governments, under every political party in this province, they have not come in on time or on budget. All the Honourable Member needs to do is go look at the Truro Hospital, Mr. Speaker, that the Conservative Party said they could build for $92 million, Mr. Speaker, and by the time they were done, it was doubled.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party.
There is a body of national evidence about this. DBFM P3 hospital projects, the Premier will know, have been significantly troubled in BC, have been very troubled in Ontario, and one of the serious problems with them is that on this model of hospital construction, the government loses the ability to adjust to healthcare changes in the future. As over that period of 30 years, as healthcare changes, it will be so much more.
The Honourable Leader of the New Democratic Party has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It will be so much more difficult for us to adapt the model that is built because we won't own the infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, nobody thinks health care in Nova Scotia over the next 20, 25, 30 years is going to be the same as it is today. So why would the Premier lock us into a hospital redevelopment model that's going to tie our hands when it comes to making future health care changes?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I wish the NDP Premier had an opportunity to actually listen to the Honourable Member, because he's absolutely right. Healthcare is changing across our province, Mr. Speaker. Why does he want to be stuck in the past when it comes to our infrastructure? Our infrastructure needs to be modernized. It needs to reflect the reality of today and the next 50 years. That's why healthcare providers stood with us today talking about this important investment. A game changer was word by Dr. Bethune, Mr. Speaker. It was Dr. Bethune and the people down at the Dixon Centre who said, we need to put the cancer care on this particular site because it matters to patients and it will talk about the future. That's exactly why we've adopted this model. It's exactly why we're going to continue to move forward.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Premier. Judicial independence is one of the pillars of our justice system and our democracy. The concept says that our courts should not be subject to improper influence from the other branches of government or from private or partisan interests. I don't think it's difficult to understand why it is crucial that this separation exists. Those who interpret the laws ought to be clearly separate from those who write the laws. So will the Premier recognize the work and independence of the Chief Judge Appointment Advisory Committee?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure which appointment she's referring to, but the judiciary is independent from government, Mr. Speaker. They continue to make recommendations as we move forward, and we're going to continue to make sure that we work with them as a separation. I'm very proud, Mr. Speaker, that the bench, the Provincial and Family Court now reflects Nova Scotia more than ever has before. Gender parity, minority representation, first Indigenous judge, Mr. Speaker, first member of the LGBT community is a member of that body, and we're going to continue to work with them to ensure that they keep their independence, Mr. Speaker, but that they actually reflect the population at large.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Well, I understand that Mr. J. Michael MacDonald, Chief Justice of Nova Scotia, recently resigned as Chair of the Chief Judge Appointment Advisory Committee, and I understand that his resignation came in the form of a letter. Will the Premier table the resignation of Chief Justice MacDonald today and tell the House the reasons for his resignation?
The Honourable Premier.
Here, Mr. Speaker, I don't believe the letter was sent to me, Mr. Speaker, but I'll check to find out if it was. I'd be happy to share it with you. I'd be very happy to tell you that we're very pleased that Family Court Judge Pam Williams has continued to stay in her role as Chief Judge, Mr. Speaker. We're looking forward to continuing to work with her. I want to tell you it's been under her leadership and that of Judge Halfpenny Macquarie that we opened the Gloudu Court in Cape Breton. We're continuing to ensure her leadership, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to work with her. She's sitting on the board around restorative justice for the Home for Coloured Children, Mr. Speaker. Those are the kinds of things that we need to continue to make sure that we work with our judiciary so that more Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, see themselves reflected in these institutions.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Ambulance offload times at our regional hospitals are rising. In fact, not one of our regional hospitals met the offload standard of 20 minutes 90% of the time this year. At times, paramedics are backed up for hours waiting to transfer patients into the care of the hospital. Mr. Speaker, can the minister tell us when regional hospitals will be meeting these provincial standards?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the member for the question. Indeed, work is and has been ongoing to investigate and identify means to improve the offload process, Mr. Speaker, to improve the ambulance offload times and address this very concern. I've mentioned to the members here, Mr. Speaker, in the past the successful work that's been done at Dartmouth General to improve these offload times. Despite an increase of about 22% in emergency visits by ambulances at that site, they actually maintained or possibly even slightly improved their offload performance over the last year based upon those changes.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, in its last evaluation of the Nova Scotia Health Authority, Accreditation Canada noted that serious issues with patient flow, including the presence of alternate level of care patients in hospital beds, were contributing to emergency department bottlenecks. In a news article today, an NSHA staff person confirms that this issue is a direct result of the high number of people waiting in hospital beds for long-term care placements, and I'll table that. Mr. Speaker, can the minister confirm that he will open new long-term care beds to address this problem?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Indeed, it's recognized that this is a complex problem. We see the effects through the emergency departments and with these offload times for the paramedics that are looking to have their patients transitioned directly into the hospital. Mr. Speaker, our hospital and healthcare system is an integrated system, and each part depends on the others. What I can tell the members that over the past number of years, we've reduced the number of people waiting in the hospital for long-term care. We've reduced the amount of time those people who are waiting in the hospital for long-term care are waiting. And Mr. Speaker, we've already announced that we're going to be adding additional long-term care beds in the Cape Breton region.
The Honourable Member for Colchester-Musquodoboit Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Justice. I don't know how people think up this stuff, but they do. There's a new vaping product out called Juul, J-U-U-L, and it started to be sold now in Canada in September. And I'll table that information. I mean, smoking Juul has become a fad in the U.S., and of course, they're calling this now an epidemic by the healthcare officials. The Juul is a USB stick size which contains the equivalent nicotine of 20 cigarettes and can be easily consumed in a day. Will the minister confirm whether or not that's even being sold now in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thought my colleague was talking about the question that they had presented for him. Mr. Speaker, I'm not familiar with the product that my colleague references, but if he's prepared to share that information with me, I'll certainly look into that for him.
The honourable member for Colchester, Musquedoboit Valley.
No, it's just the stuff that people create. I don't know how they do it, but anyway, Juul pods, they allow for a faster and smoother absorption of nicotine, so that you can have a much higher concentration of it and not feel that burning effect in the throat. It has rainbow-colored lights and comes in flavors. And it comes in flavors like cotton candy and peanut butter and jam. So it's particularly appealing to young people. So, Mr. Speaker, as you can imagine, the Canadian Cancer Society is against this product. So will Nova Scotia be a leader and use regulation to ensure safe levels of nicotine should this product come to Nova Scotia for consumption?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wasn't sure if my colleague was talking about Christmas or the usual activities in a daycare in the morning. Mr. Speaker, on a serious note, important that we recognize the point my colleague is making, that high levels of consumption of nicotine could be harmful. I'll certainly take whatever information my colleague has and, working with the Minister of Health, determine the substance to this particular issue and if it is even available here in Nova Scotia.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and my question through you is for the Minister of Health and Wellness. Mr. Speaker, on September the 26th, I asked the Minister about a woman whose kidney was a match with her brother. Despite this, she was worried that her brother would die while waiting for the transplant. Mr. Speaker, since then, another desperate family has come forward. Heather Jo McDonald is a match and willing to donate her kidney to her dad, Sidney Joe, but they are anxiously waiting to hear when the operation will occur. So my question again to the Minister is, will the Minister tell us how long the wait list is for live donor kidney transplants?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's safe to say that no member of this legislature can truly appreciate the significance of the situation that the members has brought forward here unless they're going through a situation like that. I can't say for sure how long the individuals may be expected to wait. As I looked into this the last time the member raised this question, Mr. Speaker, I was explained that there are a lot of variables that come into play for both the prospective donor as well as the prospective recipients, that there are various clinical parameters, their health and wellness and so on. So there are a lot of variables that can affect how long someone may be waiting to complete that surgery.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate what the Minister said, and there's no question that there are variables that take place, but the people that I had talked about before were waiting almost 2 years. Heather Jo McDonald says there hasn't been any communication from the health authority about her dad's kidney transplant since July. Mr. Speaker, that's a long time to wait. It's a long time to wonder, and it's a long time to worry. It's a terrifying waiting game where her dad's life weighs in the balance. So the question for the Minister is, will he concede that the NSHAO should communicate more frequently and openly with families like Heather Jo McDonald's when it's about a transplant and a life-threatening situation?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, on two fronts, I'd like to respond to the member's inquiry. On the first, the specific instance, I would ask that the member provide the information that he has so that I can follow up on the specific case situation. But then more broadly, indeed, with respect to the communication and the flow of communication, what that process is for all Nova Scotians that may be in a similar situation to ensure the communication is more efficient, more effective. So I will certainly endeavour to look into that, which would be more of the system side of this particular situation.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, members on this side of the House have repeatedly asked the Minister of Health to attend rallies during this session. But so far, none of us have been successful in enticing him to join us, Mr. Speaker. The Minister misjudges us if he thinks stonewalling us will get us to stop asking. Nova Scotians want their voices to be heard. They're afraid, and they want the Health Minister to hear what they have to say. So, Mr. Speaker, I'll ask one more time. Will the Minister of Health come to Cape Breton on October 14th to attend a rally in Waterford? And, Mr. Speaker, I think I've heard every answer so far in this legislature except yes or no.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member raising and bringing to the floor of the legislature the concerns of his constituents with respect to the future of healthcare services in his community and indeed the broader Cape Breton region. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we share those concerns. We recognize and heard from Cape Bretoners the concerns about the delivery of healthcare, the frequent closures of emergency rooms, Mr. Speaker. We went out with our partners, the Nova Scotia Health Authority. We inspected and evaluated the infrastructure that's currently in place. I determined that some of that infrastructure has passed its useful life, Mr. Speaker, for future expansion of healthcare services, and that's why we made the decision to invest in new primary healthcare services and expansions at Glace Bay and Cape Breton Regional.
The honourable member for Northside Westmount.
Well, I guess, Mr. Speaker, I hadn't heard them all. There was another new one today. Mr. Speaker, I understand the minister's a busy man. Maybe October 14th doesn't work for him. But there must be a day soon that he can take a few hours to hear from Cape Bretoners. All the minister has to do is name the date and the time, and we'll make a meeting happen for him. So will the minister commit today to arranging a date and a time to meet with Cape Bretoners, or will he finally admit that he just doesn't want to hear from them?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I believe I may have mentioned this previously, but contrary to statements made by members opposite with respect to the announcement that was made in Cape Breton back in June, I did meet with people from Cape Breton. I met with physicians, Mr. Speaker. I met with municipal and First Nations representatives, Mr. Speaker, to hear from them, indeed, even on that afternoon itself of that announcement, Mr. Speaker. But every meeting that I take, Mr. Speaker, isn't always in front of cameras.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health, and just to follow up, I don't know one person from my community that was at any of those meetings to discuss. Mr. Speaker, last May, the Department announced that it would fund a new high-dose flu vaccine to protect seniors from the virus and reduce hospitalizations. While the standard flu vaccine is available to all Nova Scotians, this new formula will only be covered for people living in long-term care facilities. Mr. Speaker, can the minister explain why no other groups were considered for this coverage?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member bringing this question forward. It's a great opportunity to remind all members, indeed all Nova Scotians, of the importance and the value of getting vaccinated for flu season, Mr. Speaker. What the member has brought forward is the high-dose flu vaccine, Mr. Speaker, far more a stronger version. This particular version of the vaccine has been identified for particularly vulnerable populations, and the most vulnerable population, Mr. Speaker, in Nova Scotia, we were reviewing this last year, is our seniors in long-term care facilities, vulnerable in part based upon their age and suppressed immune systems, but also living in a facility with many other individuals. That's why that was the population that was targeted for this expansion.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Funny enough, though, not all seniors who are living in long-term care facilities are the only ones that require it. In fact, this government's focus on home care and keeping seniors in their homes longer, which we're reminded of daily. So I'm confused as to why the department hasn't considered to defray the costs for those seniors with compromised immune systems to improve the vaccine. So, Mr. Speaker, will the minister commit to covering flu zone for everyone with a serious immune condition over the age of 65?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a relatively new vaccine. It is the first time that we are rolling it out in our province. We will continue to monitor the effects that this new vaccine has on, again, what has been identified as the most likely or most vulnerable population. That would be those living within long-term care facilities, because it's not just about the age and suppressed immune systems in that environment, but indeed also the fact that they are living in an environment in close proximity, Mr. Speaker. So it's a combination of factors that led to us choosing this particular population. We will evaluate and see how the vaccine performs and consider any potential future expansions after we see the results.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Health and Wellness. In the major loss to Bedeque and surrounding areas, Dr. Emily Beaton informed Victoria County Memorial Hospital of her decision to leave just after 2 years, and I'll table that, Mr. Speaker. Citing issues with her contract and an unstable work environment, she will now take her talents to Prince Edward Island. We've heard similar stories with 2 doctors leaving Digby because they weren't receiving what was promised by the Nova Scotia Health Authority. Perhaps the Nova Scotia Health Authority could have taken Dr. Beaton out to dinner to discuss her situation instead of looking out for themselves. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister is, to avoid any future confusion over contracts, why does the Minister not stick to the master agreement that was agreed to by Doctors Nova Scotia when issuing contracts to potential recruits?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member's question. I think in his preamble, he forgot to mention the new physician that started work in his community. A physician, one of the first to come through our immigration stream, Mr. Speaker, in partnership. So I think that's important for the member to let his community know about the success of these programs and initiatives that we've taken place. With respect, Mr. Speaker, the contract, he's confusing 2 different sets of contracts. There's a master agreement which sets out the compensation frameworks for physicians, but indeed, Mr. Speaker, individual physicians as independent businesses, Mr. Speaker, they enter into individual contracts on top of the master agreement.
The honourable member for Victoria the Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, make no mistake, Nova Scotia has a doctor shortage, and Bedeque still has 1 doctor short. Nova Scotians can take little comfort that in the last few weeks there have been 2 high-level departures from the recruitment departments at the Nova Scotia Health Authority. The Nova Scotia Health Authority can promote our surf, lobster and coastlines on their website all they want. But the reality is when you're working over 100 hours a week, there's not much time to take in those activities. PEI is similar in that they can offer surf, lobster and the coastlines, but they also pay $100,000 more to their doctors, according to Doctors Nova Scotia. So my question to the Minister, how does he expect to compete and recruit more doctors to Nova Scotia when doctors can work less, make more money and have a better quality of life just a few hours away?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and with all due respect, I think my colleague, the Minister of Fisheries and Aquaculture, would agree that the lobster in Nova Scotia is far superior to that they could find in PEI. But, Mr. Speaker, with respect, Mr. Speaker, to the compensation side of things, the data that's been cited and used is a couple of years old, It's a couple of years old, coming from a report, Kai-High data, Mr. Speaker, that doesn't take into account the nearly $40 million that we invested in improving the compensation available for family physicians, providing comprehensive family care to Nova Scotians. So, Mr. Speaker, that data is a bit out of date for the member.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've risen on this topic a number of times in the past, and that's kidney disease and access to treatment. There's a group in Barrington Passage been looking for a satellite hemodialysis unit in that community. Right now, the closest option is for them to drive 54 minutes to Yarmouth, or more than an hour away to Liverpool. And the space, if the space isn't available in Yarmouth, that drive gets even longer. There are 14 people in Shelburne County right now having to travel to service in Yarmouth. So my question to the Minister of Health, can he commit to creating a satellite hemodialysis unit in Barrington Passage for patients in that area?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do recognize the member's concern. As he noted, he has brought it to the floor. I believe even some correspondence that we've shared on behalf of his constituents. Mr. Speaker, I really don't think I can fully appreciate, nor can any of us, unless you know someone who goes through dialysis treatment. It takes a significant amount of time, even if it is located nearby, because you're actually in a chair for, I believe, somewhere in the vicinity of 4 hours a day to receive treatment. Mr. Speaker, we're not at this time in a position to expand to that community, but what the member should know, and all members know, is that we have been investing. We're expanding in a number of communities. There are expansions underway. We need to get those across the line, Mr. Speaker, to improve and reduce the transportation time for people receiving care. I think it's over 40 seats that we're adding to the system across the province.
The Honourable House Leader for the Official Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, there are 14 people in Shelburne County alone who have to travel to Yarmouth County in order to receive that service. There's a pocket of people who need the service of full dialysis rather than home dialysis, so they can't really transfer in. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that the Yarmouth service is actually almost to capacity, so some serious decisions are going to have to be made. A friend of mine, Artie Smith, who lives in Woods Harbour, is getting to the end of his rope, and he says he can't function because of the time it takes out of his day and out of his week in order to do it. And that need continues as our population ages and the instances of other comorbidities keep rising. Can the minister outline what needs or conditions are required for a community to receive consideration for a satellite hemodialysis unit?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Part of the review, rather than on individual community advocacy or individual one-off situations. It's actually decisions been made in a broader review of the system. We identified, I believe, 6 sites getting additional seats, either new or expansion of dialysis that we've announced over the last couple of years. Work is well underway on many of these. Others are at different stages of design. In combination, I believe it's somewhere over 40 additional seats added to the province for dialysis patients. That's going to reduce the travel time for many, reduce the pressure in some other communities and existing sites. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to get those rolled out and then reevaluate our overall dialysis system.
The Honourable Member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. My question also is for the Minister of Health today. On September the 21st, the House heard me talk about Mr. Reg Edwards. I did submit a form on his behalf as well, and the difficulties that Mr. Edwards is having assessing medical attention. At that time, the minister responded that day by saying, for individuals like the constituent referenced, who may have trouble traveling outside of their home environment, our physicians can now provide care through phone communication through the My Health NS website, a secure portal to provide that service. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Edwards is a senior who isn't really up on the technologies. He doesn't have a computer or a smartphone, so he can't access My Health Nova Scotia. So does the minister have a solution for patients with serious health concerns who are orphaned by lack of doctors and, similar to Mr. Edwards, do not have reasonable access to My Health NS?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just to clarify my previous remarks, in the compensation opportunities and the changes that we made in the agreement with Doctors Nova Scotia last March, about 8 months ago now, I guess, was not for smartphone access to provide care, but indeed traditional telephone. Really, it's in that non-face-to-face space. So traditional telephone consults that can take place, as well as communication through the My Health NS technology.
The honourable member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Yes, thank you, Minister. So, as Mr. Edwards' medication currently needs to be refilled, it needs to be refilled regularly. He did have the pharmacist extend his prescription for 30 days that they were allowed to do, but yet this is just really pushing the problem down the road for Mr. Edwards. Like many seniors, like Mr. Edwards, are finding after years of contributing into this province that they now need the help of the provincial medical system the most, and they don't have access to it. Mr. Minister, could you please tell Mr. Edwards and others like him how to get proper services they deserve instead of waiting on an 811 system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And indeed, the province continues with its investments to improve access to primary care for all Nova Scotians, including the member's constituents, but all Nova Scotians. We recognize and have heard from frontline healthcare providers that our healthcare systems are shifting the way that individuals provide the best care is in a collaborative environment, Mr. Speaker. We are supporting and investing in collaborative practices. Indeed, in January, when the Nova Scotia Health Authority put out a request for submissions of proposals to work in or expand collaborative practices, they had over 100 submissions, Mr. Speaker, by over 400 physicians. That represents about Order,
please. The Honourable Minister of Health.
So the interest, Mr. Speaker, of our frontline healthcare providers in this type of service being provided is better service, Mr. Speaker, expanded service, and it's helpful in our recruitment and retention of physicians and other frontline healthcare workers, and that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Babel Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Environment. A recent study suggests that in 30 years we could have more plastics in our ocean than fish. Mr. Speaker, we are a fishing and coastal province. We're on the front lines of this issue. We should be taking leadership on it. The federal government has committed to changing its own procurement practices to make sure that 75% of all its plastics are being reused and recycled. We should be doing the same thing here and using our government purchasing power to lead the change. So my question for the minister, will she commit today to set strong targets for reducing single-use plastics in our government operations?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable member for this question. This certainly has been topical, and we've been talking about it a lot the last few days. Single-use plastics are a problem. We all know that. They're in our waterways. They need to be dealt with. And Nova Scotians have been using innovative ways to not use the single-use plastics. We all have a role to play with this, whether it's using reusable bags or coming up with other innovation to use plastic. I recently heard about an entrepreneur in the local area who was making furniture out of plastics. I think we have a lot of ways to be able to reuse it or not use it, and I think Nova Scotians are playing their part in this. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Truro, Babel Hill, Millbrook, Salmon River.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Well, I have to agree with the minister. Yes, Nova Scotians have been using innovative ways, but what about the government? Residents in Lunenburg have formed Plastic-Free Lunenburg. They're working with businesses and consumers to reduce the use of single-use plastics. Businesses like the Savvy Sailor and the Point General have already made big changes. They are an example to us. But as experts point out, we could be implementing policies for extended producer responsibility. We already have it for electronics. It's very simple. If you profit from manufacturing it, then you need to be responsible for recycling it. How hard can it be? So my question for the minister is this: when can we expect to see leadership from her government by way of policies that will tackle single-use plastics in this province?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank the member for that other question. Certainly, I mean, we know that this is a problem. We know it's going in, but I think it's becoming less and less. People are more responsible. They are recycling. They're actively recycling. And I'm happy to report that none of the recycled plastic that is collected in Nova Scotia has ever gone into a Nova Scotia landfill. It is being sold and being dealt with. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And my question through you is to the Minister of TIR. Mr. Speaker, earlier this year I had the pleasure of having the company of the Minister as we toured the wonderful constituencies of Sydney River, Myra, Lewisburg. And during that tour, of course, the minister was able to see firsthand some of the challenges that the residents of that community face. With the implementation and planning for the 5-year plan coming up, and the Minister of Finance is always telling us about the surpluses she's able to maintain, I'm wondering if the minister could give me an update on where we are with the Myra Gut Bridge.
The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the minister, the member opposite, for the question. I'd also like to extend my thanks to the great people of Gabaroos for accepting one of the pilot projects for our off-road vehicle program, which is turning out to be very well received. The Myra Bridge, the Myra Bridge is in design, and we're very close to finishing the design and putting it out for tender.
The honourable member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
I really appreciate that answer, and I want to clarify that, of course, the pilot project that we got in Gabaroos was actually meant to be in the Myra Gut area, but there's no bridge for them to go across. So, Mr. Speaker, that being said, the people of Gabaroos were very happy to have the pilot project. The only Tory constituency to get one anywhere is in the province of Nova Scotia, and that's been pointed out by my colleagues on Member-Kenshin. But the real question, Mr. Speaker, the real question at this point and time, and it's one that I have asked since I've been coming to this House, is the New Boston Road. The residents of the New Boston Road over the course of the last little while have indeed seen some pavement on an end of the highway where there is a huge hill and there's some traffic concerns for students who are traveling by bus. They are telling me that if they had just 0.4 more kilometres, they would be very happy for this year. So I'm just wondering if the minister would have some consideration, because I did take him on that road as well, on the New Boston Road, 0.4 kilometres, pavement.
The Honourable Premier.
Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question, Mr. Speaker. I want to assure him, even though he could not get Premier MacDonald to pay attention to this road, I will take this under advisement and go talk to Mr.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. This past summer, many days saw large numbers of people again visit Carter's Beach because of its natural beauty and power of social media. When a large number of people arrive at the same time without proper parking, washroom and refuse facilities, it creates a problem for everyone. Last week, I inquired about the Minister's Department's infrastructure plans for one of the province's most spectacular beaches. I tabled a photo to show how ineffective the pack-in, pack-out program was, and was told by the Minister of Community Culture and Heritage it takes a while to educate people on the program. My question to the minister is, can she please tell this House when Carter's Beach will have the permanent infrastructure required like other beaches in this province?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very happy to report to the beach that I too was one of the people that went to Carter's Beach this summer. I have to agree, it's a beautiful beach. I was absolutely blown away by the beauty and also by the cleanliness. I had visited that day about 6 or 8 beaches in the area. All of them were pack-in, pack-out programs. I think I saw one piece of litter in all those beaches that day. So, you know, we have already put out, there are porta-pot toilets on the site. There are not garbage cans on the site, and to date, we're not going to be putting garbage cans in. They aren't really effective. People empty their garbage in it, the birds get in it, they go. The pack-in, pack-out is working for Nova Scotians. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Queens Shelburne.
Well, sadly, Mr. Speaker, the residents that live on that road wouldn't agree with that statement. For nearby residents, the government's inaction has led to many headaches over the last few years as they struggle to go retrieve their mail, get out of their driveways, and even keep their properties clean. When I raised the issue last week, the Minister of Communities, Culture and Heritage suggested that people park and walk from Somerville Beach Provincial Park to Carter's, and that people are taking shorter walks on the beach and not spending the entire day. Mr. Speaker, I couldn't disagree more. This beach has become a destination, and it would be quite a hike from Somerville Beach Park to Carter's, especially for many seniors. It's a 10-kilometre walk. We need to strike the right balance between residents, beachgoers, and protecting the ecosystem of the area. So my question to the minister is, will she commit to working with the region of Queens to address the serious parking and safety concerns of my constituents?
The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Yeah, thank the honourable member for that question. She absolutely has a point. We noted too that day it was very hard to get in, very hard to get out. Emergency vehicles are going to, you have to, you know, in theory it's nice to say we need to protect our dunes, and we do, absolutely. They have to be identified and protected. We have to make sure that there isn't any garbage, that people do pack in and out. We have to make sure that there's washroom facilities so people aren't using the dunes, and the parking is a problem. We have to make sure emergency vehicles can get in there. I absolutely will meet with the people of the area and try to come to some solution. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Services. This summer, I had a constituent who had applied for a grant through Housing Nova Scotia. When they calculated his annual income, he was confused, because Housing Nova Scotia includes the caregiver benefit as income, but the Department of Health does not. The inconsistency in policies prevents some Nova Scotians from getting the help they need. To be clear, Mr. Speaker, I'm asking about policy, not the housing client. So my question for the minister is this: will Housing Nova Scotia update its policies so they align with those of the Department of Health in calculating annual income? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank the honourable member for the question. And in fact, this is an issue that we have indeed have been looking at. And as soon as, I don't know whether it will be lined up with the Department of Health or whether it will be lined up with the Department of Community Services, but we are looking to make sure that there is consistency across the programs that we deliver. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Mr. Speaker, the government has indicated that it wants to encourage Nova Scotians to stay in their homes as long as possible. Grants through Housing Nova Scotia are meant to help people on a fixed income provide necessary updates to their homes. Unfortunately, differing policies from department to department have left many confused and frustrated. And again, not speaking to a specific case, but the policy framework, my question is this: are regular reviews being conducted at community services to ensure that these sorts of policy discrepancies don't impact the living conditions of applicants? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
I want to thank the honourable member for the question. I don't know about whether they've been done in the past, but I can tell you that we do them now. Thank you.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Energy and Mines. Earlier this week, a new poll came out that showed Nova Scotians are split around the drilling BP does off our coast. 54% oppose it, 46% support it. But there's one thing, Mr. Speaker, that both sides agree with. 90% of those interviewed, Mr. Speaker, said that capping stack should be within hand within about a 24-hour period. Mr. Speaker, that kind of consensus should send a message to the government. Our coastal communities, our fishing industries, our tourist industry, and our marine environment deserves protection. So I'd like to ask the minister, what is the minister and the government doing to address the concerns that many Nova Scotians have about when it comes to the availability of a capping stack?
The Honourable Minister of Energy and Mines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for the question, and I agree. We have industries that have coexisted for generations. We have a very thriving fishing industry, and as well, we receive billions in royalties through our offshore that support schools and services that we provide. We have an offshore petroleum board that is the oversight. They are the regulator. I have full confidence in their ability to do that work, and we will continue to work with them closely as we continue to promote both our fishing industry and as well as our offshore exploration.
The Honourable House Leader for the New Democratic Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The town of Mahone Bay, the town of Lunenburg, the municipality of Shelburne have all written to the federal minister about concerns with the Canada Offshore Petroleum Board, and around the process of approval, Mr. Speaker, they want stricter regulations. So I'd like to ask the minister, what is the minister doing to ensure that towns like Mahone Bay and Lunenburg and others who have concerns about their coastal industry, fishing industries, what is the minister doing to ensure that the federal government hears their concerns, Mr. Speaker?
The Honourable Minister of Energy and Mines.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for the question. Again, I have great faith in the Offshore Petroleum Board and the regulatory role that they play. We keep a very close relationship with all of our communities across the province. I've had the opportunity in my previous role to go down and visit those municipalities and hear those concerns and conversations. I believe that for generations our industry...
Please, time allotted for oral questions put by members to ministers has expired. Just before we move on to government business, the Honourable Minister of the Environment on an introduction.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to draw the House's attention to the East Gallery, where we're joined by two members from Mad Canada. I would like to introduce Susan McCaskill. She's the Chapter Services Manager for the Atlantic Region. Anissa Aldridge McLeod, who is she's a member of our National Board of Directors who resides here in Halifax. They've been instrumental in working with our Nova Scotia government on the Cannabis Act and now on the Traffic Safety Act. And they're helping us save lives, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to welcome them to the House.
We'll now move on to government business. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would you please call public bills for second reading?
We'll now call public bills for second reading.
Mr. Speaker, would you please call Bill number 80, the Traffic Safety Act?
Now call Bill number 80, the Traffic Safety Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to make an introduction.
Permission granted.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Joining us today in the East Gallery are many of the important stakeholders that have been with us for quite a long time and have informed us on the reshaping of this important piece of legislation. So as I call you out, if you would stand and accept the warm welcome of the House, I have members of the Road Safety Advisory Committee, the Nova Scotia Police Association, HRM Superintendent Don McLean, Insurance Bureau of Canada, Amanda Dean and Aaron Norwood, the Halifax Cycling Coalition, Sarah Manchin, Ecology Action Centre, Kelsey Lane, Canadian Federation of Independent Business, Jordy Morgan and Amber Ruddy, Nova Scotia Auto Recyclers Association, Andrew McDonald, Nova Scotia Auto Dealers Association, John Sutherland and Rhea Boland, Child Safety Link, a division of the IWK, Sandra Newton, Mad Atlantic, Susan McCaskill and Arissa McLeod, who gets introduced twice today. TIR staff from the Superintendent of Insurance, Jennifer Calder and Angela. And we have some TIR staff here, Paul Arsenault, Kevin Mitchell, Royden Traynor, and Corey Harrington. And I really want to publicly express my thanks to them for putting a lot of work into this legislation. Miss somebody? Okay. My apologies if I missed someone. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 80, the Traffic Safety Act, be read for a second time. Mr. Speaker, today I am pleased to rise in the House to speak about the new Traffic Safety Act being proposed to replace the outdated Motor Vehicle Act. The new modern Traffic Safety Act will help make the province's roads and highways much safer. Before I begin my remarks, Mr. Speaker, I would like to thank in particular the opposition party's critics for meeting with department staff over the summer to discuss the new Traffic Safety Act. The spirit of the cooperation reflects the importance of the new Act and the role this legislation has on the lives of all Nova Scotians. This proposed legislation will ensure that government can quickly respond to changing technologies and future road safety needs. As you know, our Motor Vehicle Act has not been rewritten since the early 1920s and has been amended numerous times since, resulting in an act that is unclear, inconsistent, and not flexible. Since the last major revision in 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act has been amended 49 times, and Mr. Speaker, I'm going to ask the House to amend it for a 50th and final time, hopefully later on. The TSA is designed as a framework act which sets broad policy and regulatory authority to address the more technical and day-to-day issues that arise in the administration of road safety in the province. The TSA will be much leaner than the current MVA. That reflects moving technical detail to regulation, which allows more flexibility and responsiveness to emerging issues. The new Act will govern and regulate the registration and identification of motor vehicles and the use of provincial highways and roads. This includes driver's licenses, the registration and inspection of vehicles, traffic laws, and equipment standards. Mr. Speaker, significant initiatives that I'd like to highlight in the new Act include defining vulnerable road users and imposing stiffer fines to drivers who injure them. The Act introduces the term vulnerable road user to better establish the relationship between motor vehicles and other road users. A vulnerable road user is a cyclist, a pedestrian, or an individual on a highway without the benefit of a protective frame or roll bar, such as a motorcyclist, Mr. Speaker, or someone who is engaged in construction, maintenance, repair, or similar functions while on that part of the highway. A peace officer during a traffic stop or collision scene, a fire official or emergency response worker assisting in a motor vehicle crash, the driver of an authorized slow-moving vehicle, or any other user as prescribed by the regulations. By defining vulnerable road user, we can increase the penalties and provisions against drivers who injure them. The new Act will double the fines and add a license suspension provision. This has also recently been done in Ontario and Quebec. We want to clarify the term distracted driving. The Act introduces the requirement for a person to drive with due care and attention and with reasonable consideration for other traffic on the highway. This replaces the current MVA section requiring a person to drive a vehicle in a careful and prudent manner. The Act will prohibit the use of handheld communications or entertainment devices or any device prescribed by regulation. The term use will be defined as using any application or function of the device, handling the device, or looking at a handheld device that is not mounted or hands-free. The Act will prohibit using a GPS system unless the device has been pre-programmed or is being used hands-free. The Act will expand the prohibition of a television screen visible to the driver to include any display screen visible to the driver. Notable exceptions include the use of GPS, collision avoidance systems, or an instrument, gauge, or system being used to provide information to the driver concerning the status of equipment or systems of the vehicle. It is proposed that devices that distract from driving be broadened to include not just the drivers of vehicles, but operators of all conveyances, including cyclists. Managing the advancement of autonomous vehicles, Mr. Speaker, another important new part of our legislation, which is now certainly part of our lexicon in Nova Scotia. Autonomous vehicles are being widely researched and tested throughout the world. Most motor vehicles manufactured today have autonomous features, with a small number of vehicles that can self-drive in some circumstances. The TSA states that regardless of the level of autonomous features, licensed drivers must be in the driver's seat and always operate the vehicle with due care and control. Important change, Mr. Speaker, is the enabling of municipalities to make bylaws regarding noise, including mufflers. The new Act will enable municipalities to pass their own bylaws regarding noise, though through motor vehicle inspections, the province will require proper working mufflers, but this change will enable municipalities to take instantaneous action instead of waiting for an inspection. Unlike the Motor Vehicle Act, the new Act consolidates and reorganizes the regulations that support the Act. It moves the technical details from the Act to regulations with a mix of governor and council and ministerial authority. This means some regulations will require cabinet approval, while others require the approval of the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal. We anticipate the new Act and its regulations will be implemented about 2 years after the passage of the Act. In tandem with the regulatory framework that will follow passage of the new Act, the Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal and the Department of Internal Services are planning a new data system to serve the Registry of Motor Vehicles. The new Act can't be implemented until that new system is in place and work on the new regulations is totally completed. The new Act reflects significant stakeholder engagement with 31 groups, 23 partners, many of them are here today, including Bicycle Nova Scotia, Insurance Bureau of Canada, Road Safety Advisory Committee, Nova Scotia Police Chiefs, and Nova Scotia Federation of Municipalities. Mr. Speaker, we also reached out to Nova Scotians and received comments from 865 people who offered 2,292 various recommendations. We will continue to reach out to stakeholders and partners as we work to develop the regulations that will accompany the Act. We got a lot of valuable insights through that consultation with the people who use the system in Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, our staff also reached out to both opposition caucuses. I was pleased that during her reply to a speech from the throne, interim Progressive Conservative leader Carla McFarlane thanked us for the session with her caucus. Their
order, please.
Input.
I'd like to remind the Honourable Minister not to refer to other members with their proper name. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Yes, I really want to express my thanks to the opposition and to the leader because their input was greatly appreciated. As you're aware, I will also be introducing 2 amendments to the existing Motor Vehicle Act to address pressing issues of drug-impaired driving and the use of facial recognition technology as part of driver's license and photo identification card issuance. The need to amend the Motor Vehicle Act for the 50th time since 1989 tells you everything you need to know about why we want to adapt the new, more flexible approach to dealing with emerging issues offered by the Traffic Safety Act. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues.
Good stuff. The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister for his words, and I too would like to congratulate and thank those in the gallery that have been part of putting together this immense piece of legislation. And I really want to point out Mr. Paul Arsenal, who I think has been the glue that has sort of kept this process together. As we talked yesterday when we were doing the technical briefing, he had mentioned that this process has been ongoing for about 10 years, and it had been under the Progressive Conservative government, the NDP government, and now the Liberal government. So it has truly been a long time project, and I know that Paul is sort of sticking around to make sure that he gets to the end, and I think we owe him and all of the people who have been involved just a round of applause and thanks. One of the interesting things yesterday was when we did have the technical briefing, it was said to us that it was, as I said earlier, a 10-year project. And it is a massive piece of legislation. I think it's probably the biggest piece of legislation, the largest bill that I've ever seen in my time here in the House of Assembly at 124 pages. And Mr. Speaker, it is time. There is no question. There is time for changes. I think the Minister was telling us stories about when it was first implemented and how he remembers that. But on a very serious note, there has been so many changes in what has taken place in the modes of transportation over the years, and it is any bill that needs 50 amendments. I think it is time to make it newer and clearer and more modern so that people can understand what it is we're trying to do. It is probably, you know, our act was probably one of the oldest ones in the country, and certainly one of the oldest acts that was here in the province of Nova Scotia. And I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, that it's not an easy task, meeting with all these different groups, trying to find a common ground. I mean, in our conversations yesterday, there was even some talk about what is the definition of a motorcycle now, because there's been so many changes with things like slingshots and spiders and trikes and all of those things that go with it. By removing some of those definitions right out of the legislation and put them in regulations, it will mean that people can meet the requirements and what needs to be done on that. So I think that's probably a very good thing. The fact that there are so many changes being made, and one of the things that happens is that the minister has more responsibility when it comes to writing of regulations. And I know that those that sit in the seat of a minister get good advice from their staff, but it is still a large responsibility on their shoulders when it comes to helping to build and write the regulations. And I think for that reason, we need to be sure that the scrutiny we give this bill is one that will make sure that people have looked at every possible situation. It is a complex bill. It is a very complex bill. And it would, you know, even in the technical briefing, I really never had a chance to go through, in the hour that we had, didn't have a chance to go through everything because, as I say, it is a technical bill, and we had a lot of questions from both opposition parties, and it is something that is why we believe that we need to be very careful as we proceed forward with this bill. I know, Mr. Speaker, that the definitions alone fill 12 pages in this piece of legislation. That's a lot of definitions. And the interpretation sometimes of definitions can be quite tricky, because what I think a definition means and what somebody else thinks it means. So when they're doing their definitions, they had to be very careful to try to make sure that it was definitions that people could understand and were willing to get good explanation on. Mr. Speaker, the average Nova Scotian, the people that are going to be affected by this law, will not have the luxury of reviewing the bill the way that we will. But that's why we're here. All 51 of us were given the responsibility to come here to make sure that the legislation that's passed by this House is legislation that meets the needs and meets the concerns of the people of the province of Nova Scotia. So as we're going through this and moving forward, I think, Minister, it is important that we give it the amount of time that it needs so that people can understand and reach out and ask. And I know, as you had mentioned in your preamble, that there has been a number of groups that have had input and some stakeholders, but 800 people in the province the size of Nova Scotia is not a fair representation, I don't think. But the other thing is, now that people are aware that the bill is here, there may be other people reaching out to try and have some input, and that's why our law amendments process is so important and so much needed in a situation like this. So, Mr. Speaker, you know, as we move forward with this piece of legislation, as we send it to law amendments, there are many things that I hope that people will bring forward. I think that the very fact that this bill has taken 10 years to put together tells me, and I hope tells Nova Scotians, that the intent of this bill is to make sure that we get it right, that it matches modern times. But I think it's also fair to say, Mr. Speaker, there's never a bill that's perfect. We can never, ever pass a piece of legislation in this House, regardless of who puts it forward, that's going to be perfect. And that's why it's so important that we listen to the public and get their input and make sure that we have heard what is going on and what is the concerns of the people, so that when it is implemented, people will feel that they are getting a fair shake and that it is a piece of legislation that indeed helps move the community forward. Mr. Speaker, I have a couple of things that I've heard from my constituents that this is One of the times I'll have an opportunity to speak to them, but one of the biggest ones is that definition of motorcycles, Mr. Minister, and how do we register a trike, and how do we register a slingshot, and how do we register a spider, because they just don't match up to the definition. So as we move forward, we're looking forward to seeing this piece of legislation go to law amendments, hear from the general public, and I look forward to the input from there. And as we move forward, I'm sure there'll be more questions put forward, and I look forward to working as a unit in this province to try to get as best a piece of legislation as we can. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Just like to remind the honourable member and all members of the Assembly here to keep your comments directed through the chair and not directly to members opposite. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very pleased to be able to rise today and speak briefly on this bill, Bill 80, the long-awaited Traffic Safety Act, where I'm joining my colleague and colleagues, the Minister and my colleague from the official opposition, in acknowledging the great and immense work that has been put into this bill by so many people, so many government employees, but also the groups that were consulted. And I'm very pleased that we can thank them here on the floor, and in particular I want to thank Paul Arsenault and Royden Traynor, who did reach out to myself and our caucus to sit down with us and listen to what we had to say on this bill and the things we were hoping for in this bill. It was really, really important. And by the sounds of it, I think they did incorporate some of our ideas into what this mammoth bill is. In particular, I'm very, very pleased to see this new term introduced, the term of the vulnerable road user. Many times in budget estimates, I have asked the minister about what changes were in the works to further protect cyclists and to enhance the ability for cyclists to not only be safe on the road, but to be able to travel further and better in the province and in the city in particular. I'm really happy to see this term vulnerable road user incorporated. And I actually am really happy to see that it advances protections for vulnerable road users, and that it will send a message to motorists, I think, of which I am one, that we need to make sure that the roads are for many, many different types of users. So thank you for that. As my colleague from Sydney River, Myra Lewisburg said, it's a giant bill. We know this, and we want to make sure it's given the due process and the time it needs to be looked through. And so that's what we're going to spend the next several days doing. Happy Thanksgiving. Just kidding. And we look forward to hearing from people in law amendments about it. So I look forward to speaking more about it in third reading, and I will close my comments for now. Thank you very much.
I recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation. It will be to close second reading on Bill number 80, the Traffic Safety Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleagues opposite for their informed comments and valuable input. Certainly shaping the regulations, which is the next gargantuan task ahead of us. Will continue to solicit their input, genuinely solicit their input, and also the input from our stakeholders as we move forward. The streets of Halifax, if you dig down a little bit, you will find the rails from the streetcars that were here. I think the last streetcar left Halifax in 1949. So this piece of legislation is bridging that gap between streetcars and autonomous cars, which are now on the streets of Halifax. So the comments about how timely it is for us to update this legislation is very much appreciated, and I sincerely believe that this has to be something that the entirety of the House embraces and has an opportunity to have input in, because it is going to equip us to move into the new phase of transportation. And just behind the autonomous cars are flying cars. They're not too far away. Actually, they're available in the world currently. So stay tuned for that chapter. So having said that, Mr. Speaker, I move to close debate on Bill 80.
Motion is for second reading of Bill number 80, the Traffic Safety Act. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 80, an act respecting highways and traffic safety.
Ordered that the bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, will you please call Bill number 79, an act to amend the Motor Vehicle Act?
Now call Bill number 79, the Motor Vehicle Act. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 79, an act to amend the Motor Vehicle Act, be read for a second time. As you are aware, Mr. Speaker, I am introducing two amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act to address the pressing issues of drug-impaired driving and the use of facial recognition technology as part of driver's license and photo identification, that is ID card, issuance. While both topics will be addressed in the Traffic Safety Act, we are bringing these amendments to the MVA forward because it will take more than a year, at least, and maybe two, before the Traffic Safety Act is proclaimed. The proposed amendment on drug-impaired driving would better align the language used in the Criminal Code to form the grounds to demand tests to apply a provincial driving suspension. A section is also being added to clarify which administrative sanctions can and cannot be combined and applied for the same incident. The proposed amendment on facial recognition will provide the Department of Transportation Infrastructure Renewal, and by extension to the Registry of Motor Vehicles, with explicit authority to use facial recognition technology as part of the driver's license and photo identification card issuance. It would restrict the use of facial recognition technology to only verify identity in the issuance of a driver's license or photo ID. It would prohibit it for the use for anything else. Government is confident it already has the legal authority to use facial recognition for the new driver's license and photo ID, but is absolutely interested in ensuring that by enshrining legal authority and amendments to the current Motor Vehicle Act and to remove any possible uncertainty. I want to assure Nova Scotians that this facial recognition information is secure, Mr. Speaker. The image is uploaded to a secure service behind the government firewall for storage and use. The biometric template created using the photo image is sent to our provider, Gemalto, and stored on their server. Again, this template is secured and only used for the purposes of our driver's license and provincial identity card. It is not provided to anyone else and is not used for any other purpose. Again, Mr. Speaker, the primary goal of the new driver's license and the use of facial recognition technology is to protect Nova Scotians against identity theft and fraud. This allows us to keep pace with the latest security and technology advances and brings us in line with the rest of the country. These two amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act come as we also discuss the new Modern Traffic Safety Act that will help make the province's roads and highways safer, Mr. Speaker. That the Motor Vehicle Act amendments are necessary only reinforces the need for the passage of the Traffic Safety Act, which could deal with such changes to regulation. Thank you for your time today, and I look forward to hearing from my colleagues. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Sydney River Myra Lewisburg.
Thank you again, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words on Bill 79, amendments to the Motor Vehicle Act. Mr. Speaker, it is no secret from the very beginning we here in the PC caucus had concerns that this government was not ready for the October 17th legislation regarding cannabis. We've had concerns about how it will be retailed. We've had concerns about the public awareness campaign, and we've had concerns about the increased policing costs for municipalities. And Mr. Speaker, we have been concerned about enforcement. Let me begin by saying we support effective enforcement under the Cannabis Control Act. Nobody, Mr. Speaker, wants people who are impaired by cannabis to get behind the wheel. This bill amends sections of Bill 108 that have yet to be proclaimed. In addition, parts of those unproclaimed sections are broad, with regulation making requirements, and we have no idea where that is. Mr. Speaker, it begs the question, is this government truly ready for legalization that is only 13 days away? Now, Mr. Speaker, we have a few other concerns about this bill, as we have mentioned in question period. And I know the minister has addressed some of this, but again, we would like to dig a little deeper about the assurances that the private information gathered by facial recognition, that software is secure. And as I say, I do realize that the minister had noted that in his opening remarks. Mr. Speaker, we wonder who the register will be allowed to share this information under this legislation. And these are just some of the questions that I hope that the minister will be able to answer as we move forward in the discussion on this debate. Mr. Speaker, we look forward to this bill going to law amendments so we hear from the public so that we can have their input, because after all, this is the People's House and this legislation affects the lives of the people of Nova Scotia. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I'll take my seat and thank you.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak on Bill 79, the Motor Vehicle Act amended. And I just want to briefly say a couple of things. Number one, obviously we're glad that these updates are being made to bring our legislation into line with the federal criminal code. I will say that I get a little antsy around the idea of facial recognition software, especially from my first reading of this, that a lot of the decisions around that would be in regulations. I think that we have to be super careful with that kind of technology, especially considering that we know that that right now that technology does not serve people who are not Caucasian very well. And so we have some questions around that, and we want to make sure that that non-Caucasian people are protected through the use of this software. Other than that, I'm just going to register that concern, and other than that, I look forward to hearing from people in law amendments and looking forward to debating this in third reading. Thank you.
Trying to recognize the Honourable Minister of Transportation. It will be to close second reading of Bill number 79, the Motor Vehicle and Act to Amend. The Honourable Minister of Transportation.
Once again, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my colleagues for their thoughtful input, and I also look forward to the discussions in the Law Amendments Committee. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise to close debate on Bill 79.
Motion is for second reading of Bill 79, the Motor Vehicle Act and Act to Amend. Would all those in favour of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried.
Bill number 79, entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 293 of the Revised Statutes 1989, the Motor Vehicle Act.
Ordered that this bill be referred to the Committee on Law Amendments. The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that you do now rise and leave the chair and the House resolve itself into Committee of the whole House on bills.
The House will now recess for a few minutes while it resolves itself into the Committee of the whole House on bills.
The Committee of the Whole House on Bills will come to order, and I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 49, the Gaming Control Act?
Bill number 49, the Gaming Control Act. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, Bill number 49 contains one clause and was returned from the Law Amendments Committee without amendment.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Shall the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 51, the Halifax Convention Centre Act?
Bill number 51, the Halifax Convention Centre Act. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, Bill number 51 contains 7 clauses and was returned from the Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall clause 2 carry?
Carry.
Shall clause 3 carry? I recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to move an amendment found on CWHB NDP-1. We would like to propose in page 1, clause 3, delete and substitute the following. Subsection 27 sub 2 of chapter 8 is amended by striking out in addition to in the first line and substituting as part of. Mr. Chair, as we said on second reading, I think I will take the government at their word that this is largely a housekeeping bill. Nonetheless, it's not up for debate that it does reduce the oversight of the convention centre, which people have been contacting us about and are concerned about. So with this amendment, all that we're suggesting is that whereas the bill before us essentially removes the requirement that Events East reports annually on their, quote, effectiveness and competitiveness of the operations of the convention centre as measured against other jurisdictions to identify and regularly reevaluate the corporation's strategic plan. So that was in the bill. It's removed by this bill. All we're saying is put it back in. They don't have to file their own annual report, but they can include that information as part of the annual financial statement, so as a part of. So we're just saying, seems like valuable information. This seems like information people would want about the convention centre. It's competitiveness vis-a-vis other similar organizations. So why can't we have it as part of the annual financial statements?
I recognize the member for Sackville-Beaverbank.
Yes, thank you very much. I guess where we are, we're similar to the NDP caucus regarding this. However, we wanted to go one step further and actually delete clause 3 altogether, so that the board would still have to provide an annual general report. As a former member of the Trade Centre Board, I know that I never viewed the annual report as a burden and actually saw it as an opportunity to show off the accomplishments of that year of what Trade Centre was able to do. So, considering that this is the Trade Centre, the new Convention Centre, is one of the larger and projects that both the HRM as well as the province have done together, and considering the considerable public criticism along the way, I think that it's important to maintain as much as we can openness and transparency when coming to the day-to-day business of the facility. I think that Nova Scotians really deserve that at the end of the day. And I am somewhat perplexed over the whole why this is in here. I think that it's relatively, and maybe the minister could explain this to me, but I would see this as being inconsistent with almost every other organization, public and private, that I know. Just this week, and if I can, I guess I would table it, was the annual report from the Ombudsman that we just received. We also just received the annual report of the Chief Electoral Officer. Those are both annual reports on those. And I can think of almost no organization, and as I said, maybe the minister could suggest which ones don't provide annual reports every year. I'd like to know that. You know, at the end of the day, is this going to be something that we're going to see coming forward in other business units, whether it be the Lottery Commission or Liquor Commission? Is this a trend that we are going to see where they're not providing these reports every year? So I'd like some clarification on that as well. So I'd leave it at that. Thank you.
I recognize the member for Glace Bay.
How did you not know that? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having to read the card to see that I was the member for Glace Bay. Mr. Chair, look, in all seriousness, I do appreciate the comments opposite from the members with respect to this operational report that is not required because it is redundant. In this day and age, the member had mentioned about annual reports. They are absolutely required. The details very specific, very much able to be vetted by all of the stakeholders from financial institutions, our own levels of scrutiny, and of course the general public. What this speaks to specifically, and it really is an antiquated report in the sense that all of the components of what we're taking out of this bill are all included in the annual report. So this is a report specifically that we're referring to is about effectiveness and competitiveness of operations. So Events East would have this as a separate annual report that they would give to both the HRM Council and just present to the minister, so not to the legislature, like the reports that the member just tabled, assessing the effectiveness and competitiveness of operations of the convention centre. So drilling down into the operations vis-a-vis other jurisdictions, other convention centres of similar size across the Federation. So it's really all the things that they have to do for an annual report. So this is not necessary because there are 4 individual specific levels of accountability that they'll now be required to provide, and they are as follows. An annual report including accountability and performance, including audited financial statements. The second one is an independent third-party assessment of the 5-year strategic plan that compares Events East performance to that plan. So we have the annual report plus a third-party vetted strategic review of the strategic plan that's over 5 years, which is very much common for Crown corporations. Third, we have any new annual outcome agreements with the province and municipalities. So any changes, any alterations, any adjustments in the relationship between Events East, the province, and HRM would have to be reported and therefore made public. And finally, the offices of the Auditor General of the province and the municipality both have full auditing authority. So every detail, every nook and cranny, every aspect of Events East will be very much under the public's watch, under the legislature's watch, under the HRM Council's watch. So this report that we're specifically referencing is one that just isn't required because it's covered to the full extent in these other 4 accountability measures. So that's the reason we're striking it. The accountability here for Events East is very much clear. Thanks.
I thank the member for Glace Bay. Does the amendment carry?
No.
Amendment is defeated. Will Clause 3 carry? Carry. Clause 4 carry? Carry. Clause 5 carry? Carry. I recognize the member for Dartmouth South.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for hesitating for less time for me than for the honourable member from Glace Bay there across the aisle. But I appreciate the minister's comments. We've heard from the beginning of the introduction of this act that this is an issue of redundancy. I think I would feel more comfortable if I saw those accountability measures, if I had seen that annual report, if I knew that it was in fact included. I I realize now how often I am required by my position to take the government's word for it, and recognize that I will come away from this debate yet again having to take the government's word for it. So we'll cross our fingers. But to that end, we propose an amendment here, essentially, again, not repealing a section of the Act that it is suggested that we repeal. So here we say, page 1, clause 5, the amendment we're moving is A, subclause 1, line 1, delete 1 the first time it appears, subclause B, subclause 2, delete. So we're essentially saying this clause ought not to be included. This clause removes the repeal of, this would remove the repeal of subsections 29(2) and 3, which require the business plan to include details on which part of the convention center's operations will be carried out by Events East, and which parts will not, and will be performed by external persons or entities. So, you know, in terms of being aware of taxpayer dollars, understanding how our operations are going, understanding how effective Events East is, again, I think that's information we want. We want to understand where those contracts are going, to whom those contracts are going, whether they're being effectively managed. And as I understand it, this was a mechanism in the original bill that showed us that. I can anticipate the minister telling us that it'll all be there and we should take your word for it. But again, in the absence of seeing that, this is an accountability measure that we feel ought to be in the Act. So I so move the amendment.
Does the amendment carry? No. The amendment is defeated. Does clause 6 carry? Carry. Oh, sorry, does clause 5 carry? Carry. Clause 6 carry? Carry. Does clause 7 carry? Carry. Does the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. Oh, does the title carry? Carry. The bill. Does the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 55, Region of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act.
What's Bill number 55, the Regional of Windsor and West Hants Municipality Act. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, Bill number 55 contains 19 clauses and was referred back from the Committee on Law Amendments without amendments.
Does clause 1 carry? Carry. Does the remaining clauses carry? Carry. Does the title carry? Carry. Does the bill carry? Carry. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 58, Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter.
Bill number 58, the Municipal Government Act and Halifax Regional Municipality Charter. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, the Bill number 58 contains 21 clauses and was also referred back from law amendments without amendments.
Does clause 1 carry? Carry. Does clause 2 to 10 carry? Carry. Does clause 11 carry? I recognize the member for Sackville Beaverbank.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I did have the benefit of attending as a member of the Law Amendments Committee when this part of the bill came up, and the HRM solicitor did come forward and make a presentation. HRM charter, which does set it apart, does have a charter, which I numerous times have talked about here in the House, that it does set it across apart from other municipal units throughout the province. And I've also argued that I feel that CBRM also deserves one. Unfortunately, they don't have one yet, and hopefully they will have one soon. But that HRM having a charter does recognize its uniqueness of all the municipal units in this municipality. And a number of years ago, HRM went through a very intensive and comprehensive regional planning exercise about 15 years ago, which has since been reviewed under their RP5 exercise about 5 years ago. And I would note that this was a very lengthy and in-depth process. It did involve public consultation as well as requests to the province to allow us to, at HRM at the time, to do that. And so they do have a very comprehensive set of development tools currently that are in place. I spoke here before in regards to their city plan, the various MPSs, bylaws, community visions that are already in place in HRM, and that they've already spent millions of dollars and many, many hours to try to get these in place. As I said, Mr. Chair, during the Law Amendments Committee hearing, the head of HRM Legal Services, John Traves, as well as Kelly Denty, who's the head of Development Services, both expressed some concerns with the approach that this legislation is taking. Bill 58 proposes using ministerial regulations instead of legislation to establish minimum planning requirements and consultation process between municipalities. The municipality is concerned that they will not have no influence or other over the adoption of regulations, and that the ministerial regulations are not captured by the Charter, which requires consultation with municipalities. This would mean that the province would be able to impose things that are perhaps not achievable or even change existing and ongoing planning processes for the largest municipality in the province. Ministerial order also runs contrary to the goals of the planning being an open and transparent with public participation decision-making process. Mr. Speaker, there were also some concerns that came out that this new method would allow the minister to impose financial penalties on municipalities, and it was expressed at that time that this seems like it's a pretty heavy-handed way to get municipalities to do basically minimum planning throughout the province. And it was felt that this was kind of a heavy-handed way to do it, either holding back grants or potentially funding formulas or even fining. So there were some concerns about that. It was ironic, and I do want to bring up here that at the time of law amendments, I mentioned this, and I want to bring this up again. So basically, HRM is asking to be removed from this process. I think that they have said that they are willing to enter into a MOU. You know, the size of HRM being almost geographically the same size as PEI, and of course representing geographically half of the province of Nova Scotia, have in some respects less effect on their neighbouring municipalities because there's really not that many. Most of those units were combined through amalgamation. So they had expressed that they are willing to ensure that they consult. They are willing to ensure that they meet what the provincial priorities are, and they recognized during law amendments that they do understand that there are provincial interests, and they're willing to ensure that they meet those provincial interests. They are just concerned about being included in this particular piece of legislation. And I will, for the record, I'll actually table the correspondence that was given to law amendments to ensure that HRM's concerns are captured. I would also suggest, during law amendments, I brought up a previous discussion of the House in regards to one of the members here, and some of the remarks that were made during a previous debate in regards to HRM, and that was on March the 22nd, 2017 for Bill 84, and I do want to quote what was actually said, and I'm going to get this wrong, so I'm going to take a peek here if I can, Mr. Chair, because I know I won't Kings South. And I'm sorry, I forgot what that was. The minister from Kings South during the debate in Halifax Regional Municipal Charter that occurred here on March 22nd said, and I will table both of this, but land use planning is a task we've delegated to the municipalities. And he goes on and he says, I feel it is important that we as a province recognize that we have a capital city here. The capital city is half of the province. They are a mature government. They are mature as Regina, Vancouver, Toronto, or Quebec City. I think we need to trust them and support them by making the decision for their communities within the HRM and not to be too much of a big brother to HRM. So that was, and I'll table that. So, based on the remarks of that we heard from the solicitor and the planning head of planning from HRM during law amendments, based on the comments of the member from Kings South that I've just tabled, what I would encourage is that from here forward that we strike HRM and not support the clauses going forward. And would ask that the government members do so as well. Thank you.
Shall clause 11 carry? No. The clause is carried. Shall 12 to 20 carry? No. Clauses 12 to 20 have carried. Shall clause 21 carry? Carried. Clause 21 has carried. Does the title carry? Carried. Does the bill carry? Carried. The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable House Leader, Government House Leader.
What's going on here?
Order. Order.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 63, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act?
Bill number 63, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, Bill number 63 contains 2 clauses and was referred back from the Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall clause 1 carry?
Carry.
Shall clause 2 carry?
Carry.
Shall the title carry?
Carry.
Does the bill carry?
Carry.
The bill is carried. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Would you please call Bill number 67, the Securities Act?
Bill number 67, the Securities Act. I recognize the clerk.
Mr. Chair, Bill number 67 contains 11 clauses and was returned from the Law Amendments Committee without amendments.
Shall clause 1 to 10 carry? Shall clause 1 carry? Sorry. I recognize the member for, the honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
I know the feeling now, right? That's what 15 years gets you here, right? No, I'm going to pause. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just draw the attention of members of CWHB NDP-1. We're move an amendment. It's just the first section, page 1, clause 1. I will not be moving the page 1, subclause 1, 2. So it's just that first section, clause 1, renumbering as subclause 2, and add immediately preceding subclause 2, 1, section 2, 1, chapter 418 of the revised statute 1989, the Securities Act, as amended by chapter 15 of the Acts of 1990, chapter 32 of the Acts of 1996, chapter 41 of the Acts of 2001, chapter 39 of the Acts of 2002, chapter 26 and 27 of the Acts of 2005, chapter 46 of the Acts of 2006, chapter 32 of the Acts of 2008, chapter 73 of the Acts of 2010, chapter 34 of the Acts of 2012, and chapter 28 of the Acts of of 2014 is further amended by adding immediately after clause AJ the following clause AJA. Recognized self-regulating organization means a self-regulating organization recognized by the Commission pursuant to Section 30. So this move, Mr. Chair, when I went through the bill with a fine-tooth comb, we realized that that to be very clear on the ability for the Commission to recognize self-regulating organizations that is pertained in the legislation. It would be more clear if it was stated in this manner. So I hope the government members recognize just a little bit of clarity and hopefully pass this motion.
I appreciate the member from Sackville-Cobequid reading the bill. I recognize the member for Argyle-Barrington.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I agree with my esteemed member. I'm sure he stayed up on a number of hours last night poring over this bill. It seems reasonable to ask for these kinds of amendments. You know, and if I come to trust a guy, it's definitely this one.
Shall the amendment carry? Oh. Member for Colchester North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To the members opposite, both the House leaders from the opposition parties have brought to our attention something that does provide more clarity. It simply says that the SROs will be recognized by the Commission, and that point of clarity, I think, is important. I would support the amendment.
Shall the amendment carry? The amendment is carried. Does clause 1 as order? Does clause 1 as amended carry? Does the remaining clauses carry? Does the title carry? Does the bill carry? The bill is carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Great job today, and I move that you do now rise to report these bills.
The motion is carried. The committee will now rise and report its business to the House.
order, please. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House will now report.
That the Committee of the Whole House on Bills has met and considered the following bills. Bills 49, 51, 55, 58, and 63 without amendments, and Bill 67 with certain amendments. And the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills for the favourable consideration of the House.
Motion carried. Ordered that these bills be read a third time on a future day. The Honourable Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that concludes government's business for today. I move that the House now do rise to meet again tomorrow, Friday, October 5th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Following the daily routine and question period, business will include Committee of the Whole House on Bills to consider Bill number 29 and Bill number 39. As well, we will have third readings of Bill numbers 49, 51, 55, 58, 63, and 67.
Motion is for the House to adjourn to rise again tomorrow, October the 5th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye. Aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The House now stands adjourned until tomorrow at 9 a.m.